Hello everyone, I am Sleepy Shoreline and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to sleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you from and what time are you watching? Now relax and unwind. I work at a gas station in the center of my town. My shifts aren't always the same, but I find myself on overnights and early mornings most of the time. I'd been there for a whole year at this point, and honestly, I didn't have many negative things to say about it. It was just a normal mid-paying job that only required me to stand in one spot for 8 hours and talk to the occasional customers. On this day, I was working an overnight shift, the typical 10 to 6. Although it's usually not too busy overnight on the weekdays, it's worth mentioning that it was raining a decent amount this night, so I was expecting it to be a pretty quiet night. The first couple hours, I sat at a chair behind the register and just waited for anyone to come in. I got a few people that paid for gas with cash, but by 12:30 or 1-ish, it was pretty much dead. No customers coming inside, and barely anyone even getting gas outside. Now, with absolutely no customers, I went around the counter and started fixing up the shelves a bit. They weren't too bad, but it was just a way to keep myself busy. As I was doing this, I had my back facing the windows, but I saw headlights glare through the store as someone pulled into the pumping stations. I didn't look because there was nothing interesting about it, just some guy pulling in to get gas. I kept on with tidying up the shelves for maybe 10 or so minutes before I unconsciously glanced out the window. The car was still there by one of the pumps, with a man standing right next to it. And as soon as I looked, the man shifted away, making it obvious that he was looking at me. After seeing that, I felt really weirded out, especially since they'd been there, supposedly pumping gas for a whole 10 minutes. I went back to the counter, then checked out the window again. 30 seconds later, seeing the man getting in his car. The headlights flashed a few times, like he was trying and failing to turn it on, but he eventually got it running and drove away in a hurry. I stood there and just looked out the window for a minute, and something just really didn't seem right. I got an idea and pulled up the recent transactions for the pump he was at. The last time it was used was hours ago. He was there for 10 minutes with no reason at all other than watching me through the windows. I stayed behind the counter for a while, trying to just wait out the rest of my shift. A few more cars came and went, and then it got really quiet again for a while. And around 3 a.m., I heard something outside. The rain was heavy, but a rhythmic shuffling noise on the ground was barely audible through it. Footsteps right along the side of the building, moving toward the back. I tried to look out the window, but there was no good view. I did notice that no cars were in the parking lot or by the pumps though. I quickly left the counter and went to the back door, which was a heavy metal door that had no windows or anything on it. I pressed my ear against it and listened as the footsteps got louder and louder until they were right on the other side of the door. My eyes moved to the handle, waiting in the silence before the handle turned slowly and slightly, but getting caught by the lock. It went quiet again. Almost a whole minute passed, then a man's voice grunted in frustration as a sudden sharp sound slid across the other side of the door. Footsteps followed soon after, leaving and going back to the side of the gas station. I ran back to the front, waiting to see them walking away, but didn't get any sight of them. Acting quickly, I picked up the store phone and dialed 911, hoping they could catch him before he got too far. I didn't know what was really happening, but someone trying to get in through the back door had to have intended something bad. When cops arrived, they didn't find the man, but what they did find was a car on the side of the road less than a quarter mile away. The same car I'd seen earlier with the man who was watching me. It had run out of gas and had mismatching license plates. Turned out to be some guy's missing car from 2 states over, The other thing they found was a long scrape across the back door, made by a sharp metal object, likely a knife. Knowing all these details, I think I actually got extremely lucky, as the man was probably on the run already and could have been planning anything. For the past couple years, I've had the same job. I'm a janitor for a popular fast food restaurant. I don't take orders or anything at all, aside from cleaning. I don't even see other workers a lot of the time, because I'm scheduled overnight. At the restaurant, everything needs to be deep cleaned every day, and during open hours, it's basically impossible to do. I'd never had anything happen during my shifts, aside from the occasional customer knocking on the window asking if we're open. So on this night, I came in and got to work like I usually did. A couple other employees were still there when I got there, but by 10, which was an hour after closing, it was just me for the rest of the night. I popped in my headphones and started scraping the grills and prepping everything that needed to be hosed down. After a while, I lost track of time, but my best guess is that it was around 12 a.m. when I heard a knock at the front of the building. I pulled off my headphones, hearing it again. I walked to the front, expecting someone at the door, wanting to see if we were closed. But when I looked, nobody was there. I went up to the door and looked out at the parking lot. No cars or people. I knew I'd heard it from this side of the building though, so I waited for it again, but there was nothing. I ended up thinking I just mistook another sound for knocking, and I went back to work. Another hour or so went by, then I took a lunch break. I grabbed my lunch bag and sat at one of the tables in the middle of the dining area, taking my time since I was actually ahead on my cleaning. Once I finished eating, I went to the back and turned to grab the mop, only to see a man's face staring at me from outside the drive-through window. He had messy hair and a blank face, but his eyes had something strange about them, like they were empty. I froze up for a second, and after a moment, the man calmly turned and walked away. My heart was racing in my chest, and I just stood in place, listening to his departing footsteps. I didn't know what to think. It was just incredibly creepy and strange. Once I got my confidence back, I opened the window and looked out to make sure he'd left. It was dark beyond the light of the restaurant, but I didn't see anyone, so I closed it up and locked it. I was on edge for the next hour, constantly looking behind me at the windows, feeling like I was being watched. But as my shift was coming to an end, I started to feel some relief, and the anxiety calmed down. One of the last few things I had to do was roll all the garbage bags out to the dumpster, which I was avoiding as long as I could. I checked the window before I stepped out, and it looked clear, so I quickly opened the door and got the garbage out. I started tossing them one by one into the dumpster, but not even 20 seconds in, the man appeared from around the corner. I stopped what I was doing and quickly asked what he needed. He didn't respond as he walked up to me and had that same empty stare. Now that I could see his whole body though, he was even more terrifying, being a fairly large man and wearing a dirty and stained coat. Not knowing what else to do, I ran for the door. I opened it as the man's footsteps rushed up behind me, and as I slammed the door shut, the man was able to stick his arm into the gap, preventing it from closing. I turned and sprinted to the other end of the restaurant, getting my keys out and unlocking the front door as fast as I could while hearing the man closing the distance on me. I barely got away again and ran before he got to me. I sprinted across the parking lot and as far as I could while calling the police. 5 minutes later, the police got to the restaurant. The man was gone. We got footage on the CCTVs, but no identity could be made of it. It also showed that as soon as I ran away, The man just stayed there and watched me for a bit, then left out the back door. What he wanted from me is unknown, but his creepy and objectively horrifying behavior gives me chills even to this day. I was working late at the office one night. We have a big 2-story building in a business complex, and sometimes if we have to catch up on work, we kind of have to stay late. I had taken 2 sick days the week before, so I really had to get my project done and didn't have much time left to do it. I planned to stay a few hours this night and a few hours the next night to get caught up, leaving anywhere between 1 and 2 a.m. Often others would be there late as well, but this night it was just me. I was working at my desk, which was in the middle of a whole room full of desks. As I typed away on my laptop though, I started to get a little drowsy, and after fighting it for a bit, I got up to make some coffee in the break room. I started the machine and leaned against the table, barely keeping my eyes open as it slowly poured into the mug. But a sudden thud shook me awake. It sounded like it was downstairs, but it was really loud, resonating through the whole building. Nothing followed the sound though, it was just the one thump. I walked over to the doorway and looked out at the stairs, debating whether or not to see what it was. Honestly, I was so tired, I thought it had to just be something falling in one of the rooms downstairs, and chose to not investigate. I grabbed my mug and went back to my desk, continuing to work. I sat there for an hour, non-stop working, but the coffee really wasn't fixing my sleepiness problem. I kept working though, trying to power through it, but I was only prolonging the inevitable. At some point, I dozed off at my desk. When my eyes opened, I remember being immediately irritated and somewhat dizzy, like I'd been annoyingly woken up from a deep sleep. As I regained my senses though, I noticed a sound coming from somewhere in the building. It was a beep, sounding every 4 or 5 seconds, but was very faint. I looked at my laptop, seeing it was nearly 2 a.m. I decided it wasn't worth trying to work anymore, so I packed up my things and brought them with me as I left the room, to both check on the beeping and to leave afterwards. As I got to the stairwell though, the beeping started to make me nervous. I'd never heard it before, and there was something eerie about it. Maybe I was too tired before to fully comprehend it. I walked down the staircase, and now with the beeping much louder, I peered into the long main hallway. At the far end, there was a metal rod laying on the ground, right in front of the open entrance door. I felt blood rush from my face, knowing it should be locked up, and realizing the beeping was from the building's security system. With nothing but instinct to go off of, I ran down to the opposite end of the hallway and out the back door, getting in my car to call for help. Although I was out of the building, what I learned next was far more terrifying. Police pulled in and searched around, not finding anyone or anything, and that's when we checked the security cameras. At 11 p.m., a man could be seen walking up and breaking the door open with a single hit from some kind of tool, creating the bang sound that I heard while getting coffee. He then quietly moved around the first floor and up to the second, where he came into the office I was in and stood quietly only a few feet behind me while I was working at my desk. He then went back downstairs, coming up again while I was sleeping and walking around the whole office, even going right up to me and searching around my desk. It's not clear if he stole anything, as there weren't cameras in every room, but there didn't seem to be any obvious answer as to what he was doing there. After seeing the security tapes though, I've never stayed alone at that office again. A couple years ago, I moved out of my dorm room and into an apartment. Of the few pieces of furniture that we had in the dorm, none of it was mine, so I was basically in need of everything. I had more money than I did before, and was planning to save for a few more months before making a bunch of purchases on things for the apartment. But there were still a few things that I did need right away. One of these was a bed frame, but they were all really expensive, and after buying a new mattress, I was really not trying to drop a whole stack of cash on a frame. I pulled up a few used furniture sites, but landed on Craigslist as it had the most postings. A lot of them were really cheap, or even free, but they all looked horrible. Then I came across one that wasn't too bad. It was just a plain old wooden bed frame that didn't look too beat up. I sent a quick email asking if it was still available, then went on with my search. A minute later I got a reply. The man said it was still available for $35. That was a perfect deal for me, so I quickly accepted his offer and we set up a time to meet later that day at 6. While I waited, I unboxed some things and moved a bunch of stuff around in the bedroom to make some space for the frame. And then at 5:30, the man emailed me his address. It was 20 minutes away in an area that I hadn't been to yet, though I wasn't exactly familiar with anywhere too well since I just moved. I grabbed some cash and headed out. As I drove, I looked around frequently to try to get myself familiar with what was around. But about halfway there, everything sort of dropped off. The town I was in very quickly ended, and the area became a lot less populated with buildings and houses. It was not what I expected. As I got to the neighborhood his house was in, I felt a little bit better, seeing that the houses weren't too far apart, and it did look mostly normal. However, they were definitely not nice-looking houses. I pulled up to the address and parked in the driveway. The lights were on, and the front door was left open. I got out and walked up, ringing the doorbell. The man came a moment later. He was tall and heavy, wearing a hat and jacket as he invited me inside. He didn't really look strange in any way, but something about him made me feel strange. It was just the way he talked, I guess, kind of like we'd been buddies for years. I followed him upstairs and down the hallway that led to a small spare bedroom. We stepped into the room, and I was immediately confused. The room looked occupied, with a dresser, nightstands, and even clothes laying around. And even the bed frame had a mattress on it with sheets and blankets. I clarified with him that I was only wanting to buy the bed frame and not the mattress or anything else, and he said of course. I looked back over at the bed frame, seeing it looked like it was fine enough, so I said I'd buy it. He smiled and offered to help me drag it out to my truck, but said he'd want a drink before we get to it. The man walked back into the hallway and came back surprisingly fast with 2 glasses of beers that he must have been keeping in the next room over. He held one out to me, but I politely declined. He looked confused and said it'd be fun, acting like we might as well hang out since we're here. I told him I was really busy tonight and really just wanted to buy the bed frame and head out, but he was getting really pushy. His smile became noticeably less genuine as he urged me to have a drink with him. I quickly stepped past him and into the hallway just to not be cornered in the small room, and I told him I was just gonna leave. I turned to walk out, and he immediately changed his attitude to being overly nice, apologizing and asking if I wanted to take the bed frame for free. I ignored him, walking faster down the stairs as I heard the man coming after me down the hallway. I was able to leave before he ever caught up, and only saw him standing at the front door as I pulled away. Maybe he was just some lonely guy living out there that wanted a buddy to hang out with, but it was all just a little too strange. I mean, the bed and room were clearly in use by someone. When I got home that night, I checked the posting again, but it was gone. From my memory though, I knew the frame was shown by itself with no mattress or anything. And come to think of it, It's even stranger that it wasn't like that when I got there, considering his intent was to sell it. But whatever that man was up to, I didn't like it. I'm a 29-year-old female, and this happened to me just 3 years ago now. I didn't live anywhere near my family at the time, but one of my family members was having something serious go on, and I needed to be there for a few months at least. My options for living while there were either a hotel, which would be incredibly expensive, or rent a place from a private owner. Finding someone who will rent out for only a few months is not an easy task. Most people's absolute minimum is 6 months. I spent multiple full days looking online and basically had no luck until I got to Craigslist. I knew there was a renting section on the site, but I was trying to avoid it unless it was necessary. Fairly quickly, though, I found a place not too far from where I needed to be. It was a very small house, which hopefully meant cheaper, and they didn't specify a minimum lease period. There was a phone number on the page, so I called it. An older-sounding woman picked up. She talked very slow, but we had a conversation about the property and pricing, and she was kind enough to let me only do a 4-month lease. Fast forward to a few weeks later, I arrived at the property. Again, it was somewhat close to where I needed to be, but it was also very far out of the way from the main city and kind of tucked away in the woods. As previously discussed, the woman didn't meet me there, but instead left a key and some papers taped to the door. I went inside and took a look around. It was very old and kind of cramped. I did a bit of unpacking, then rested after the long drive, not doing much else other than watching TV. Around 7, though, there was a knock at the door. I got up and checked my phone, not seeing any text from the lady saying she was coming over. I walked up and looked out the peephole. There was a man standing a few feet away from the front of the porch. I opened it. How can I help you? He kept a serious face as he explained that he was here for the fireplace cleaning. I looked over at his van that was parked in the driveway behind my car, then back at him. It's a little late, isn't it? Almost 7:30. He shrugged and said that's what it was scheduled for. I told him to wait a minute, closing the door and walking back to the living room. I texted the lady and tried calling as well, but couldn't get a hold of her. I then went over to the fireplace and it wasn't all that dirty. I didn't really know what to think because it wasn't my house. Maybe it was just a cleaning service that the lady had scheduled as part of prepping the house for me. This might sound odd, but fireplace cleaning was almost such a random service that I thought the man likely wasn't lying. Like if he said he was a plumber or something generic, I probably would have been more skeptical. I went back, and when I opened the door, the man was now standing right on the porch, just a couple feet from me. It almost scared me, not expecting him to be so close all of a sudden. Before I could say anything, he said he was trying to get out on time tonight and needed to start now, then stepped closer and put his hand on the door, gently pushing it a bit more open. Now I was getting uncomfortable and rethinking everything. "Yeah, just give me one more minute and I'll let you in," I said, trying to close the door, but the man left his hand on it and kept it open. Knowing I couldn't close it if he wasn't going to let me, I had no choice anymore but to let him in. I walked him over to the fireplace as he followed me close behind. He went up and looked at it for only a second, and right as he turned around, I took my keys from the counter and ran out to my car. The man's heavy footsteps shook through the house as I got out and into my car. He ran up to the window just as I turned it on. With his van right behind me, I had to turn off the driveway and into the woods, dodging trees as I quickly made my way back to the pavement and eventually onto the road. I called the police while driving, too scared to stop. When officers arrived, he and his van were gone, having left the front door wide open. It plainly showed that he was not supposed to be there. Of what the police and I know, the man probably knew that this house was being rented out and that whoever the new resident was, they wouldn't know if he was actually scheduled to clean the fireplace or not, so he might be let in. From there, it's anyone's guess as to what he planned on doing. One time, I found a phone on the side of the road. I was driving home later at night, probably like 10 p.m. Things were quiet. As I came to a stop at a red light, I casually looked around. The intersection that I was at was busy during the day, but at night, not so much. I was next to a divider that was to my left, and I noticed something on the ground. It appeared to be a phone. I opened up my door and looked closer, realizing that it was in fact a cell phone, so I picked it up. It had been raining outside, so the phone was pretty wet, and I figured it was probably broken. But after looking closer, I saw that it was an iPhone, and I hit the power button and it actually turned on. After that, the light turned green, so I had to finish driving home. But once I was back, I took the phone out and looked at it. Nothing appeared to be wrong with it, and I wanted to return it to the rightful owner. The phone was password protected though, so I had no clue who it belonged to. I tried 1234 as the passcode and some other obvious ones, but none of them worked. After that, I tried using voice commands. I asked Siri who the owner of the phone was, and she said the phone belonged to Brian. Now I had a name, but unfortunately, it was a pretty common name. I asked Siri Brian's contact information, but I was told that the phone had to be unlocked for that. That was the same for everything else. I tried a lot of other commands, but didn't get any results, so I only had the one name to go off of. After that, I decided to make a post on Craigslist that I found somebody's cell phone. I described where I had found it and included a picture of it, and asked for the owner to get in touch with me. Within a day, I got a reply. The first reply, though, was somebody claiming that the phone was theirs. I asked them what their name was. If they answered with anything other than Brian, I knew it wasn't theirs. The first person didn't want to give me their name and asked me why I wanted to know. I said because I know the name of the person who the phone belongs to, and I want to make sure that it's you. They responded saying their name was Joe, and I knew that they weren't the owner. Sometime later, though, I got another reply with somebody saying that it was their phone. When I asked them their name, they said Brian. I finally had found the owner. I was really happy, and I couldn't believe that it actually worked. I asked Brian where he wanted to meet to pick up his phone. Brian told me that he didn't want to cause me any trouble, and he could just stop by my house. When he said that, I thought maybe I shouldn't give him my address. But I told myself, I'm not selling anything on Craigslist, I'm just returning the phone to the owner. So I convinced myself that it was fine, and I gave Brian my home address. He told me that he would stop by at 8 p.m. to pick up the phone. I agreed, and that night at around 8 p.m., there was a knock on my front door. I went over and answered it, and Brian was there, or at least I assumed that's who he was. He had sort of short reddish hair and was about average height. I said hi to him and then handed him the phone. He took it and then asked me where I found it. I told him, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's crazy." Then he just kind of stood there for a few seconds. I was about to say, "Well, have a good night now," and then close the door. But then randomly, he asked me if he could come inside for a minute. I didn't want him to. I knew nothing about this guy, and I certainly knew better than to let him into my house. Plus, I was the only one home at the time. So I told him that I was about to go to bed, and then I started to shut the door. He kept standing there, but said okay. I then closed the door and locked it. Then I turned out the lights right inside. It didn't seem like Brian was walking away though, so I went over to the living room window to look. When I did, I saw Brian still standing there on the front step. It was really weird. Then, probably 30 seconds later, he slowly walked back to his car that was parked on the side of the street. He got inside, and I was about to walk away, but I wanted to see him leave. He sat inside of his car, but did not immediately drive away. I kept watching, and I wasn't going to leave until he did. For like 5 minutes, he was just sitting inside of his car. Then he got out of it again. He started walking back up to my front step, and I had a bad feeling when I saw this. I didn't know what he could possibly want. I was expecting him to maybe knock on the door or something, but he didn't. Instead, he stood on the front step and looked around for a few seconds. Then he started to walk away to the side of the house. When he was out of sight, I finally moved and went to another window. Went to my bedroom. When I got to the window, just barely saw him go out of sight and behind my house. Now he was in the backyard, and I didn't like this at all. I moved to another back window and then turned on a backlight to outside. When it went on, I saw Brian continue to walk through my backyard, but now to the other side of my house. Then he casually walked around the back to the front yard. Once he was there, he returned to his car. Then he started the engine and drove away. I was really weirded out by this. He'd made a complete lap around my house. After he drove away, he didn't come back that night. At least not that I'm aware of. I still wonder what he was doing though. My best guess is maybe he was going to try to break in. And when I turned the light on, it possibly scared him off. I really don't know. Either way, it was very weird. A few years ago, I lost my phone. I just remember that one day I came home from work and realized that I didn't have my phone on me. I tried to remember where I could have possibly left it, but I honestly had no clue. I worked a pretty normal office job in the city at that time. Also, I would walk several blocks to get to my car and then would drive home. It didn't seem that likely to me that I would drop my phone, but I honestly had no clue. So the next day when I went to work, I looked around my cubicle, hoping that I had left it there. I thought that it had to be there, because I hadn't remembered dropping it or any situations where I could have. I guess it was possible though. After searching my desk and around it, my phone was nowhere to be seen. I felt completely dejected and realized that probably meant that my phone was at Donna. If I lost it on the city streets or something, it certainly would not still be there. I logged onto my computer to work after that and figured that I would have to buy another phone later. But when I was checking my email, I saw one with the subject, cell phone. My eyes lit up when I saw this. Could somebody have found my phone? I clicked on the email and read it. It was short and to the point. Whoever sent it said that they had found my phone and got my contact information from it. They wanted to give me my phone back as soon as possible, but asked me if I could pay a finder's fee of $400. My happiness went away after reading the last sentence. A finder's fee of $400? I really hoped that it was a joke. I responded to the email saying that I would meet them as soon as possible when they were available to get my phone back. I added that I hoped they were joking about the $400. The sender of the email did not give me a name, and it was from a Gmail account with just random letters and numbers. They responded to me within the hour and told me that they were not joking and wanted $400 for the phone. My phone was the newest version of the iPhone, which did sell for a lot more than $400. But I would still rather buy a new phone for more money than give whoever this was the satisfaction. It made me really angry that they thought they could do that to me. I asked to meet with the person and didn't say if I would pay them or not. The person said that they would come by my house that night and asked me for my address. I responded saying that I would rather meet in public, but they didn't respond to me after that. All of our communication took place within this one workday for me. At the end of the workday, I left and drove back home. But on the way, I stopped at the store and got a cheap phone to use in the meantime. I was trying to make up my mind of what I would do. Either I would have to buy a new phone or get this person to be reasonable with me. I thought about offering them $100 or trying to negotiate, but that still made me mad. I know I shouldn't have to pay them any money at all. I also considered getting the police involved, but I didn't know if anything could be done. So I got home that night at like 6 p.m. or so. I lived by myself in a pretty standard one-bedroom apartment. About an hour after returning home, there was a knock on my door. I walked over and looked through the people to see who was there. When I did, I saw a man standing outside of the door. He was wearing a black jacket, a winter hat, and sunglasses. He was also wearing a scarf that was covering most of his mouth. It was wintertime though, so nothing about it was that strange. I realized this might be the guy who had my phone. He likely got my address from my phone, as he had got my contact information. I opened up the door and said hi to him. I really couldn't tell much of what he looked like because of what he was wearing, but he was a little bit shorter than me. He said that he had my phone and wanted just $400 for it and would give it back to me. Then he reached into his pocket and held my phone out for just a second. I tried to reason with the guy. I asked him why he thought I should give him that much money. He said because he wanted it. I told him that that was unreasonable, that it was my phone, so I shouldn't have to pay him. The guy cursed at me, and then out of nowhere started walking forward and into my apartment. I didn't have any time to stop him, and I backed up, but couldn't even try to close the door on him. He was already mostly inside. At that point, I just turned and ran for the nearest room, which happened to be my bathroom. I was just a few feet ahead of the guy, but when I started running, gained some distance on him. I got into the bathroom and then slammed the door shut and locked it. The guy tried entering seconds later, and after that I heard him walk away. He was still inside my apartment though. Luckily, I had my crappy phone that I just bought at Walmart. I dialed 911 as I heard the guy rummaging through my apartment. I told the police what was going on, and I was told that some officers were on the way. Still, I was pretty scared being alone in my place with this creep. I heard him go into my bedroom, as well as the living room and kitchen. I hoped that he wouldn't try to enter the bathroom again, but luckily he didn't. He remained inside of my apartment for maybe 5 minutes, and then I heard him leave. I stayed in the bathroom until the police got there though. They arrived about 5 minutes after the man left. When I went back out, I saw that my apartment was pretty messed up. The guy was probably looking around for anything valuable that I had, and he did steal a few things. Luckily, my wallet was still on me. I told the police all the information that I could, and they said they would look into it. Unfortunately, I never got my phone back. I still don't know who stole it. I've considered that it was possibly somebody who works in my building that did it. My office building is very large, and multiple companies are in there. Lots of people go through the building, so that might be what happened, but I really don't know that for sure. I had a terrifying experience last year. I live alone in a smaller house, and I've been living there for 3 years now. It has 2 bedrooms and just 1 bathroom, but it's enough space for me. I also have a somewhat small front yard and a fenced-in backyard as well. One Friday night, I got home from work a little early. I didn't have anything going on that night, but was going to hang out with some friends the following day. I decided to do all of my chores right then and there and get them out of the way. There are a lot of chores that I do throughout the week, but also some that I leave for the weekends, like doing laundry and vacuuming the carpet in my house, which is all carpet, and a few other things as well. So after getting home, I did laundry, vacuumed, and cleaned the bathroom as well. I also organized a few other things. It only took me like an hour and a half to do everything, and then I was going to cook some food. I had a recipe that I saved on my phone and I was going to try. However, I realized then that I couldn't find my phone. Obviously, I didn't have it when I was cleaning and stuff. Normally, I would have left it on the coffee table in the living room, or sometimes I left it on the couch. When I looked in both of those places, though, I couldn't find it. I was not worried until I looked in the entire kitchen, and it wasn't there either. I went into the bathroom and my bedroom as well, and I knew it wasn't there, but I looked anyways. After not finding it at all, I wondered if I lost it somewhere at work or something. But then I remembered that I had my phone shortly after arriving back at my house. I had texted one of my friends, so I knew that it had to be around here somewhere. I took all the cushions off of my couch and it wasn't there. I basically turned the entire place upside down, but the phone just wasn't anywhere. This really puzzled me. I did not have a house phone or any other phone, so I couldn't call to see where it was. The last place that I decided to look was the basement. I had an unfinished basement which I really never used. There were all kinds of pipes and beams down there, and I also stored several large boxes and other items. I kept my vacuum down there, but just next to the base of the stairs. So I had only gone down there earlier just to grab the vacuum and then put it back. Maybe, just maybe, on some slim crazy chance, it was down there. I mean, I didn't know where else it would be. I turned on the light and then started to head down the stairs. The light did not do a whole lot, and it only lit up one measly bulb near the base of the stairs. After walking down, I looked on the floor next to the vacuum, but saw nothing. I was about to turn and head back upstairs, but then heard a noise. I also thought that I saw some movement out of the corner of my eye. It was mostly out of my sight, and also in a darker area of the basement. When I heard this, I stopped and turned to look in the direction of it. That's when I saw a man come into my view from behind a large box. It was really creepy looking, and I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. He was a ways away, and I was so shocked for a second or two that I didn't know how to react. The man then stood up and actually started walking towards me. I then turned and bolted up the stairs like my life depended on it. I made it up to the top and left my basement. Then I slammed the door shut behind me and ran for my front door. I did not stop until I made it all the way outside. During this, I didn't think at all. It was really all reaction. I just wanted to get out of my house. After leaving, I realized that I hadn't grabbed my keys or anything at all. Obviously, I didn't have my phone, so I couldn't call the police, and I couldn't get in my car either. I also didn't want to go back inside my house, so I ran to a neighbor's. I didn't go next to her because I thought the guy might run outside after me. So instead, I ran several doors down and then knocked on the front door of that house. I didn't know who they were, but I just hoped that they would answer. Luckily, after about 30 seconds, they did. I asked them to call the police and then told them what was happening. They agreed to call the police, and we both waited on the front step and watched my house. We saw no sign of anybody leaving. I wasn't sure if the guy had already gone out or if he was still inside. The police were really quick to respond though, and got there probably within 2 minutes. I went back over with my neighbor and met an officer there. The police then entered my house as we waited outside. They came out a while later with the same man that I'd seen in my basement. He had still been in the house. In fact, he was found hiding in my basement, and on him he had my cell phone in his pocket. I was able to get my phone back, but the whole thing really creeped me out a lot. I'm not sure when or how he got my phone. The only thing that I can think of was that he was already in my house when I got back from work. Then he might have came upstairs without my knowledge and took the phone and went back down. How he got in the house and when he got in the house, I also don't know. Maybe I simply forgot to lock my front door, or maybe he entered through a window. There were no signs of a break-in. Either way, since that experience, I bought security cameras, and I'm always sure to make sure that my doors are locked. This happened just a few months ago. I went to a park to work out with my friend Mikey. There's a park not too far away from where we live that has everything. There's a baseball field, basketball courts, and a playground. There's also picnic tables and several large grassy areas. Overall, it's really big. Sometimes I go there with my friends to play basketball or whatever. On this day, Nike and I were doing some conditioning in the park. We both play sports and are there all the time. It was a little bit later on this night though, at right around sunset. The park had some lights, but after sunset it would get pretty quiet. So by this time, most of the people had left already. There were a few people here and there spread out, but not that many. The park also had 2 parking lots, one on each end of it. Mikey and I had been running in one of the large grassy areas where there wasn't really anybody else around. When we left, we walked all the way back to the parking lot and got inside of my car. It was sort of a long walk, and after getting back, I realized that I didn't have my phone. I also didn't know where it was. I soon figured out that I likely forgot it where we had been at the park. We would set our stuff down when we worked out, and obviously I wouldn't run with my phone in my pocket. So we got out of my car and started walking back over to see if I had forgot it on the ground. Now, a long distance away, near where we had been, I saw this guy walking. I assumed that he was just passing by, but the guy then looked to the ground near where Mikey and I were. I saw him pick up what appeared to be a phone from the ground, and I knew it was mine. I started to run over to the guy, not wanting him to leave with my phone. But when he picked it up, he turned instantly and started walking in the other direction. I started yelling at that point, but he was still a good ways away. He didn't stop and ignored my yelling. Now I started sprinting at full speed. The guy was walking pretty fast and heading towards the other parking lot. As I kept running and yelling for the guy to stop, he then started running. He sprinted to a car that was parked in the lot and then got inside. I kept running, but he started his engine and drove away before I could reach him. Then I turned and started sprinting back for my car in the other lot. Mikey was about halfway there and I waved him back. He also saw everything that happened and started running back to the parking lot with me. There was a good chance that the guy would have to drive past the parking lot that we were in. Ours was closer to a more common road, and the other parking lot was kind of the back one. We made it back to my car and got inside just in time to see the guy driving past our lot. I started my car and instantly pulled out and onto the road behind the guy. We kept a distance back, but followed him. I'm not sure if he realized that we were following him or not, but the roads weren't very busy, so it wasn't difficult to keep up with him. We followed him for about 10 minutes until we arrived on a quiet residential street. The man parked on the side of the road in front of a house, and I parked a little ways back. Then he got out of the car, and I got out to confront him. I quickly walked in his direction as he headed towards the house. I yelled at him again, and this time he looked at me. I said that I saw him pick up my phone at the park. He turned away and said he didn't know what I was talking about, and then told me to leave him alone. Then he hurried to the front door and went inside. I wasn't going to try to follow him into his house or anything, but I knew that he was lying to me. He followed me. We went to the front door after the man went inside. I then rang the doorbell, and when nobody answered right away, I knocked on the front door. Like 10 seconds later, the door opened up. The guy came out holding a baseball bat, and we backed away. Then a woman came out of the house as well, also holding a baseball bat. Mikey and I ran back for the car, and they chased us all the way there. I was afraid that they were going to try to whack my car or something, so I drove out of there as fast as I could. We were able to get away, and Mikey called the police on his phone and reported what had happened. We parked on the next street over as we waited for the police to get there. About 10 minutes later, they arrived. The police ended up knocking on the guy's door. He denied everything, but then he tried running away. I guess he had run-ins with the cops in the past, and some recently, so he didn't want to talk to the officers. I didn't see what happened, but I guess the police ended up getting into the house, and the guy and the woman got busted for drugs. They also recovered my cell phone, which I got back. That was one of the craziest experiences that I've ever had. Looking back though, I probably shouldn't have followed the guy. Knowing who he was now, he could have been dangerous. I don't think he knew I was following him, because if he had known, he might have tried to do something about it. I used to work at a gym that was open for 24 hours. It was a pretty large gym, and had more than just a weight room and exercise room. We had 2 levels, a basketball court, several classrooms for fitness classes like yoga, and then multiple weight and cardio areas. The gym had a good number of employees, and it needed them for how large it was. But at night, not as many people worked there, because not very many people would work out during those hours. Well, when I first started, I was mostly working overnight hours. Most of the time, we still had about 4 or 5 employees working at once, but they would be really spread out. Somebody would be at the front desk, and somebody else would be at the other desk we had outside of the basketball gym. Then the others would go around and do whatever was needed. We would switch around who did what, and we're all trained for several different things. So one night, I was working and it was really late. At this time, it was probably about 1 a.m., which was about the quietest time there. From probably midnight to 4 a.m., it would be really quiet. There would be a decent amount of people who would work out starting at about 4 a.m. It was still quiet, but significantly busy. Then at 6 a.m., it started to get even more busy. That's usually around when I got off. Anyways, on this particular night, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, it was really dead. I think there was maybe 2 or 3 people in the entire gym working out. I went out to get some cleaning done of several different areas that were sort of out of the way. The more common areas would be cleaned more often and a higher priority to be clean, but other spots would only be cleaned overnights a lot of the time. I had a little cart with some cleaning supplies on it, and I went to an area where I was all by myself. The gym was not a big open area, but more so many different areas. I got to work cleaning and became pretty focused on what I was doing. I enjoyed cleaning most of the time and found it satisfying. After I was over there for about 20 or 30 minutes, I heard a noise from a ways away. I assumed that it was just somebody weightlifting. I wasn't aware of anybody else in the immediate area though. Sometime later, I heard it again. This time, I realized that it sounded like it was coming from the stairwell. It was not common for people to be in the stairwell, but sometimes people would walk up and down it. The noises didn't really sound like a weightlifting noise to me, and I didn't know why somebody would be in there for that long. I thought maybe it was one of my coworkers doing something, and because of that, I decided to go over and check. I casually walked over to the stairwell, which was over to the left and across the room. This was also a very secluded area of our gym. When I got there, I started to walk in, but saw a man already inside the stairwell. He did not work at the gym, but he also wasn't wearing workout clothes like most of the members would. He was wearing black jeans, a black jacket, and had long stringy hair, and was facing in the opposite direction. He was just standing there, not really doing anything. I turned around and walked away, going back to what I was doing. I finished cleaning that area and forgot about the guy. There were a few classrooms nearby, and I went inside one of them to clean. These classrooms had wooden floors, mirrors, and then a couple of windows that looked out into the hallway. I was cleaning in this classroom like I was supposed to. About 10 minutes in, something caught my eye. The windows were sort of tinted, but I noticed somebody standing out of one of them. I soon realized that it was the guy that I saw in the stairwell. He was just standing there looking at me and staring into the room. It sort of gave me the creeps. I tried to just ignore it though, and I kept cleaning. It was there for an uncomfortable amount of time, probably over a minute. Then I looked up and he was gone. Whoever this guy was, he seemed pretty sketchy. I questioned if he was even a member at our gym. Obviously, I didn't know all the members because it was a really large gym. I would recognize a good number of people though who worked out around the same times that I would work. And for what it's worth, I'd never seen this guy before. Still, I did my best to just ignore it. After cleaning the classroom, I cleaned several other areas and straightened them out. I would also organize weights that were put back in the wrong places or out of order. When I was doing this, I saw the man again. He was not near me, but just slowly walking around a ways out. I didn't know what he was doing there, but still, I wasn't going to ask him or anything. We had someone working at the front desk at all times. You have to scan in at the front desk to enter the gym. So this guy must be a member, or else I didn't know how he would have gotten inside. That's what I was thinking, and I went on with my cleaning. I was in a corner of a weight area and cleaning the mirrors there. This area was also really out of the way, and we had multiple areas with weights in them. As I was over here, I once more saw the guy, except this time he was walking towards me and carrying a barbell. He held the barbell over his shoulder, and immediately I got a bad feeling. He was just walking right towards me and staring at me. I tried to move away without making it obvious that I was trying to get away from him specifically. I walked away from the corner and to the side. I was near the stairwell and I headed towards it. When I did, the man changed directions and walked a little bit faster towards me. What was he going to do? Whack me with a barbell? At that point, I got to the stairs and jogged up them quickly. It would be nearly impossible to go up the staircase holding a barbell with any kind of speed. I heard the guy enter the stairwell, but did not hear him going up the stairs behind me. When I made it to the top though, I heard the extremely loud noise of the barbell being thrown to the ground. I walked over to the front desk area and found one of my coworkers. I told him about the man, and he didn't know who I was talking about. I realized that somehow this guy must have snuck in. We decided that we were going to ask him to leave. We carefully walked down the stairs and saw the barbell on the ground, but the man nowhere in sight. After looking around, a short time later, we located him walking through a nearby cardio area. We tried to get his attention, but he ignored us. I asked the man if he was a member, but he just kept walking. He didn't even answer me. My coworker told him that we were asking him to leave. He just turned and headed in another direction. For a moment, we didn't really know what to do. We decided that we might have to call the police. My coworker followed the guy, trying to make it clear to him that he had to leave or we were calling the cops. The guy just turned away and tried walking away when my coworker spoke. Then he started running away from us. We just let him go because it seemed like he might be dangerous. We went back to the front desk and called the police. They arrived a short time later and went into the gym to look for the guy. Eventually, they found him hiding behind a Stairmaster machine. He would not leave at first, and the police had to physically get him out of the gym. I really don't know what his problem was. Either way, I was really glad when he was gone. That was by far my scariest experience working at the gym. For a little background, I'm a female and I've been going to the gym for several years. I work out at about the same time every day. This is something that happened last year. The gym that I go to, I would describe as average size. Typically, I work out in the afternoon after I get done with work. Then I go home afterwards. Every time at the gym, I notice a lot of the same people working out at around the same time as me. The gym is also usually never that busy, which is one of the best parts of it. One day, I arrived at the gym after work like any other. I went into the locker room and changed, and then went out to warm up on the treadmill. The treadmills at my gym face some of the weight room up ahead. There are a couple of machines that sort of face the treadmills. I remember that when I was walking on the treadmill, I noticed a guy sit down on the bicep curl machine, which happened to be facing my direction. Moments later, I looked back in the direction and saw that the guy was just staring at me. I looked away, only to see him staring at me again. Now, by the third time catching him staring at me, it was sort of awkward. It was a guy who I had never seen here before. I kind of kept an eye on him, and he didn't even seem to be using the machine other than just to sit down. I did my best to ignore the man and move on with my workout. I finished on the treadmill and moved away to the weight area. This was past where the man was, and also to the left. For the next 10 minutes or so, everything was fine. But when I turned around, I saw the guy sitting on a bench a ways away, once again staring at me. I thought to myself, great, a gym creep. I wasn't really sure how to handle it. The man appeared to be in his 40s, was about average height and weight, and had light brown, sort of messy hair. Once again, he wasn't even working out, but just watching me. I really couldn't believe the nerve of this guy. I moved to another corner of the gym where I could do my same workout. I told myself just to ignore him. I worked out for probably 20 minutes or so over there until I was done. When I stopped, I turned around to leave. Once more, there the guy was. Now it wasn't as obvious that he was sitting there facing me, but he would be at equipment close to me or that was facing me. I never noticed him doing any sets or working out at all. I decided to leave after that because I was pretty much done. I went into the women's locker room and changed and then got my gym bag. When I came out of the locker room, I didn't immediately notice the guy, which was good. But when I was walking to the front door to leave, I saw him sitting in a chair in the lobby area. This wasn't good because I knew he would see me. When I passed him by, he didn't get up though, so I felt better. I got back to my car and then left to drive home. I just hoped that the man would not become a regular at my gym. There was no way that he wasn't intentionally staring at me. If that continued, I was definitely going to report him. I drove home and it took maybe 10 minutes. I made it back to my house, and after going inside, I started to go through my normal routine of when I got back. I would unpack my stuff, then go take a shower and make some food. But before I could do that, I was entering my living room when I noticed out my window a car going slowly down the street. Immediately, I was suspicious. The car went a little ways past my house, and then it looked like it was going to pull over to the side of the road. It sort of went out of my sight, and for a moment, I figured that it was going to the neighbors. I was just about to walk away from the window, but I decided not to. I watched after the car parked, and I just barely heard a door open and shut. Just moments later, I saw a man walking along the side of my street. I saw that it was the same man from the gym. I couldn't believe my eyes. He walked up the street and then right into my front yard. I moved over to a better place to look out of the window where I was less visible in case the man could see into the windows. The man walked right up to my front step. Then he knocked on the door. I kept watching him from the window. After knocking on the door, he kind of moved, went behind the brick pillar on the front step next to the door. He was sort of out of my sight after he went behind it. I didn't go answer the door, but instead I called the police. Several minutes later, the man knocked again. This time, he knocked louder than before. But after I didn't answer that time, he left. I watched him walk back to his car, and probably less than a minute after he drove away, the police got there. I told them how the man left, and they were able to locate him and pull him over a short time later. I'm pretty sure they just told him to leave me alone though. I don't think they gave him a ticket or anything. Luckily though, I haven't seen the man since. Years ago, I worked at this small 24-hour gym. It was a weight room with a few treadmills and other machines. Then there was a small locker room, and that was about it. I would work overnights and would be the only employee there. The way the gym was set up was that you would walk in the front doors and down a hallway about 50 feet long. Then there was a front desk where I would sit, and to my left, it opened up to the main weight room and stuff. Well, I only worked there for 6 months, but that was enough time for something really weird to happen. The gym was located in a pretty average area. It wasn't right in the city, but also wasn't in the middle of nowhere or anything. Overnights, not that many people would show up though. The gym wasn't that large to begin with and didn't have a whole lot of members. One night I was by myself and nobody else was in the gym at all. By now it was probably close to 2 o'clock in the morning and I was pretty bored. As I sat there behind the front counter, the front door to the gym suddenly opened. I looked up and saw a man walk in. I had never seen him before, but I assumed that he was a member. He was sort of tall and thin and had a rugged look to him. He walked over to the front desk, but then attempted to walk right past me. He didn't even look in my direction. I stopped him, saying, "You have to scan in here." The man stopped in his tracks and turned around. He looked at me but didn't say anything. Then he turned and just walked right back out the front door. It was really weird. I was thinking maybe he forgot his membership card in his car or something. After the man walked out of the building, he went to the right and out of my view. We had a large window on both sides of the front door, which was also glass so I could see out of it. My view was of one section of our parking lot and a little bit of the street behind it, but there were many parts of the parking lot that I could not see. I didn't see this man or his car, and I only saw empty parking spaces. Some time went by, and then I figured that the guy just left. It was a pretty weird deal. Then I was still sitting at my desk and randomly looked up to see that the guy was back. He was standing at the window outside, right next to the front door, and looking in. He wasn't walking inside though. When I noticed him, he then moved away to the side and out of my view. He showed up again less than a minute later, looking at me from the other side of the window. It was really strange. Then he went out of sight again. I was trying to figure out what exactly was going on here. Probably 5 minutes went by and then the man came back. This time he walked inside and I got a bad feeling what he did. But after making it about 5 feet in the door, he just turned around and walked out. I was relieved to see him go, but also even more weirded out by this. He then stood outside the door by the window and started looking at me. When I looked at him, he didn't move away like the times prior to that. This time, he just kept staring at me. It was really creepy and I had to look away. But when I looked back at him, he was still staring at me. Then he kind of waved me outside like he was motioning for me to leave the gym. I did not get up. Then the man disappeared to the side and out of my sight yet again. I didn't know what to make of his bizarre behavior, but it gets crazier. Just seconds after he left the window again, I suddenly heard the sounds of a car engine starting and then squealing tires. I then saw a car drive extremely fast through the parking lot from the right side. It left and went over the curb and onto the street really recklessly. I saw the car go on the road and then out of my sight. Then I heard a police siren and saw a police car with flashing lights go down the street after him. Then things went back to normal. The guy did not return. I was just wondering what on earth he was doing for the longest time. I still have no idea what he was doing. Last year, I was driving on a road trip and was going to be gone for a few days. On the second night, I was sort of in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know where I would stay for the night, but I was hoping to find a hotel. But the more I was driving, the less it seemed I was near any kind of a city. The coverage on my phone was also going in and out all night. Finally, at probably 11 o'clock, I pulled into a rest area and looked up hotels in the nearby area. The closest one was a motel that was 12 miles down the road. I decided that that would be just fine with me. I was really tired, and then I left the rest stop to head for the motel. It took maybe 10 minutes to get there, and it was about a mile off the highway. It was in a very small town that really didn't have much of anything. The motel looked quite creepy, to be honest with you. It was old, small, and had a little office connected to the side of the building. There was just one level of rooms, with maybe 10 or 12 total. I pulled into the parking lot, which was nearly empty. Normally, I wouldn't want to stay here, but it was just for a quick night's rest. I would be out of there by 6 or 7 in the morning, and the rates for the night were just $29, which was honestly overpriced. So after parking, I walked to the office to get my room. When I walked in, a man with a longer beard sat behind the counter. He sat up in his chair and asked me what I wanted. I told him I would like a room and then gave him the $29. He then handed me a key and told me my room number. Then he leaned back in his chair again. I left his office and walked down to my room. When I got to my room, I went inside, and it was about what I expected. Not very clean, and old outdated furniture in the room. The TV was a box TV, but I was lucky that they had one at all. I pretty much just got ready for bed and then tried falling asleep. After laying down in the bed, I was there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes and starting to doze off. That's when I got this weird feeling. I opened my eyes and turned over in bed. When I turned over, I faced a window. That's when I saw somebody moving away from the window. It wasn't like they were walking by though. It was like they had been looking in. I saw it for just a split second and couldn't tell who they were at all. I got up from my bed and closed the curtains which had been open, but that didn't really do much good. They were cheap and didn't reach all the way. Plus, the curtains were so thin that you could sort of see through them. But it was the best that I could do. I looked out the window as well, but didn't see anything. Whoever looked inside was gone now. I got back in bed and laid down. I tried falling asleep again, but that kind of ruined it for me. Now I wasn't as relaxed as before. I was still tired though, and after maybe 10 minutes, I was finally able to feel relaxed once more. But then I got the feeling again, like I was being watched or something. I was facing the window laying down this time, so I opened my eyes and looked to the window. I could see somebody was there again. At first, I didn't see them much because of the curtains, but then I saw a man's head for just a split second. He then moved out of sight once more and away from the window. I couldn't tell who he was at all because of how dark it was and how I only saw him for about a split second. I got up and walked over to the window again. I looked outside, but the person was gone. I was really freaked out that some creep was looking in my window. I stayed at the window for a few minutes looking around, but I didn't see anybody, so I then decided to go back to bed again. My door was locked and I covered the window as best as I could. So all I could do now was try to go back to sleep. I got back in bed and closed my eyes again. This time it took even longer. Maybe 20 minutes later, I was finally able to sleep. I don't know how long I was sleeping for, but I do know that I woke up sometime later. What I remember was hearing the sound of my door opening up. The door was old and cheap, so it squeaked a lot. Instantly, I became wide awake. I sat up and looked to the doorway. I saw some guy entering and at first had no idea who he was. Once more, when he saw me, he quickly left out the door and ran away. It was after he left that I realized who it was. It was the guy who was working at the motel. I got out of my bed, packed all of my stuff, which shouldn't take me very long. Then I left the motel and got into my car. I drove away and went back onto the highway, and later stopped at another rest area. I slept in my car there for the rest of the night. As crazy as it sounds, I felt a lot safer there than in that motel room. The next morning, I called the motel and tried to report the guy. However, I was hung up on when I started complaining. So after that, I called the police and told them what happened. I'm not sure exactly what they did about it. The man running the place was a total creep. I'm really glad that I'm a light sleeper and woke up when he opened the door. I don't know what he was planning to do. I hope he doesn't do that to anybody else. A few years back, I found myself driving down a quiet old highway, late at night. I had to travel for work, and sadly they didn't fly me out, so I had to drive. I would get compensated though, which was nice, but I still didn't like such long driving. Now, I had originally planned on stopping in a city and getting a hotel there, but I was making such good time that I drove right past it and kept going. By that point, I was kind of winging it, because I didn't know where the next major city was, and not even major city like big city, but just a city with a decent hotel and some other businesses in it. By the time it was midnight, I finally started to get tired and was now almost 5 hours ahead of schedule. That was good, but now I had no clue where I was going to stay. I took an exit to get some gas. I figured I could drive for another hour or so if I needed to. But after fueling my car, I saw a sign for an old motel down the road. I'm not too picky, and the motel didn't look that nice, but it honestly could have been worse. Without very high expectations, I drove over to the motel and got a room for the night. It was a pretty standard 2-level motel, with each room facing the parking lot and opening right up to it. There was a sidewalk in front of the rooms on the first level, and a walkway on the second one as well. I ended up getting a room on the first level at the far end. So after I got the room key, I got my things and headed inside. The room was actually nicer than I expected. There was a decent-sized cable TV. The bathroom was in the back, and the room was clean. The bed was also pretty comfortable. I took a shower and then got in bed and decided to watch some TV until I got really sleepy. I would say about 30 minutes later, there was a sudden knock on the door. This was really odd, but I wasn't afraid of anything, or so I thought. I got up out of bed and walked over to the door. Then I opened it up. There was a man standing there. He looked somewhat tall and skinny. He had longer hair and a beard. The man said hi, and I asked him what he wanted. His speech was slightly slurred, and I suspected alcohol. The man then asked me if he could come inside just for a few minutes. I didn't know why he thought I would let him in my motel room. I said no, and then I shut the door in his face. After I did, I could tell that he was just standing there, and I hoped that he would go away. I went back over to my bed and sat down. I glanced over, but I couldn't see the guy anymore. I hoped that he was gone. But like 30 seconds later, he knocked on the door again. I yelled at him to go away. Then I walked over to the window and looked. I saw him walking away on the sidewalk in front of the rest of the rooms. I was thinking to myself that I hope he doesn't bother other people, and hopefully nobody lets him in their rooms. Then I sat back down on the bed. Probably 5 minutes after this, I noticed movement out of my window. I looked over and saw that the guy was back. He was standing right outside and was holding what looked like some kind of pipe object. I really didn't know what it was. But then he swung it at my window and it made a really loud noise. The window didn't break at first though. He hit it several more times before I heard glass starting to break. I realized then that this guy must have been insane, and he was probably going to get in. I really had nothing to fight him off with, so I got up from my bed, grabbed my phone, keys, and wallet, and ran to the back. Then I got inside of the bathroom and locked myself in there. I heard him repeatedly hitting my window and glass breaking. I called the police and told them what was going on. They said that they would get there as soon as possible. My only fear was that the guy would somehow be able to break the bathroom door. This was a somewhat cheap motel, so I wasn't sure how good a quality the door was. After a couple of minutes of him whacking the window, he made his way inside. I heard him hitting random things in the room. He hit the TV, and I know he hit some walls and other stuff. I remained hidden in the bathroom. Soon though, he made his way towards the back. He whacked the bathroom door a few times, and then went back into the other area of the room. After about another minute, he went back towards the bathroom. Then I heard sirens. I knew it was just a matter of time before the police got there now. The sirens didn't seem to scare the guy off. Instead, he was still hitting things. The police arrived within a minute after that, and started yelling at the guy to stop. Soon, I finally heard him stop hitting things. The police were able to get him, and I came out from the bathroom. I saw that the room was all torn up. He certainly succeeded in breaking things. At least he didn't hurt anybody though. After that, I obviously had to get a new room. The rest of the night went well though. The next morning, I was back on the road. That was by far my craziest hotel experience. For a little bit of background, I'm a female, and this took place last year. I was staying in a hotel for a few days. I had a room on the second floor, and the hotel was very large, but not super fancy. They had a good breakfast that was free for guests and was on the first floor. There was a lot of things that I was going to do in the city I was staying in. I had several friends in the area, and I was excited to visit with them. After arriving the first day, I spent some time with my friends and then returned to the hotel. I pretty much went straight to bed that night. The next morning, I got up and went down to get some breakfast. It was pretty busy, and a lot of other people were also getting food. I sat by myself in a small table in the corner. I was next to a window, but I was facing the rest of the people there. When I was sitting there, I noticed there was this one guy staring at me. He was sitting across all the way to the other side of the room. This guy was also sitting by himself. At first, I didn't think he could be looking at me, but probably something else that was close to me. I looked around, but there really wasn't anything else there. For some reason, I think he was staring at me. He looked away a few times, but his eyes would return to me every so often. He wasn't smiling or anything either, but kept a straight face. The man appeared somewhat young, but was about average height and somewhat thin. He was also wearing a black short-sleeve shirt and black pants. He didn't appear to be eating anything either. He was just sitting there and staring in my direction. I stayed there for another 10 minutes or so. Then I decided to go back to my room. I was in my room for maybe an hour before leaving and meeting up with my friends again. I was gone for basically the entire day. I didn't arrive back at my hotel until late, probably around midnight. After getting back, things were very quiet inside. But I noticed just past the lobby in the breakfast room, the same guy was sitting in there. He was at a table just kind of looking around when I walked sort of by him to the hallway, and he looked at me. It was kind of strange to see him again, especially at this hour. After I passed him by, I went to the elevator and took it up to the second floor. Then I walked down that hallway to my room. I entered and then took a shower and was going to go to bed. But I was really thirsty and realized that I didn't have any water. I really didn't want to drink the water from the sink in the bathroom. I just personally hate drinking tap water. I knew there was a vending machine down the hallway, so I decided to go there. When I got to the door, I looked out of the peephole first though. I really don't know why. It's just a habit that I sometimes do. When I did, I saw the same man, the one who had been staring at me at breakfast, and again when I got back to the hotel. He was just standing there outside of my door in the hallway. I had no clue why he was here or what he was doing. I'd watched him for about 10 seconds, and he just kind of stood around. Then I quietly moved away from the door. I was really creeped out and didn't know what to do. For a few minutes, I was trying to figure out what the guy could possibly be doing. I was trying to think of logical explanations in my head, but I really didn't have it. After about 5 minutes, I went back over to the door and looked. He was finally gone. I very carefully opened up the door and looked. I checked both ways down the hallway, and the coast was clear. So I walked down to the end where the vending machines were. As I was getting my water there, it was very quiet. When I finally got the water, I picked it up and started walking back to my room. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. They were a ways back. I walked faster, and then when I was about halfway to my room, looked over my shoulder. It was the same guy. It was still a far distance away, but definitely following me. I continued to walk quickly to my door, but my heart was now racing. I knew that if I had any kind of mishap when entering my key card, Matt might catch up to me. And we all know that hotel key cards can be really hard to get to work sometimes. I finally made it to my door, and thank goodness the card worked perfectly. I got inside and then swiftly shut the door in one fast motion. Just about a second later, the knob started to turn, but it was locked. I looked out and saw the same guy there again. What on earth did he want? After that, there was a quiet knock at the door. There was no way that I was going to answer it. Instead, I went to the phone and called the front desk. I reported the guy and gave his description. I was told that they would look into it. Then I just waited inside my room. About a minute or two later, I looked through my peephole and the guy was gone. but I saw a hotel employee walking down the hallway. I left my room and told the employee what had happened. He said that he would keep an eye out for the man. After that, I went to bed. It took a while to fall asleep, but eventually I was able to. The next morning, I was told by hotel management that they located the man in the hotel the previous night. When questioned, he ran. However, he did not leave, but hid somewhere else inside the hotel. He was later spotted hiding in the breakfast room behind a table. The police got called on the guy, and eventually he was arrested for refusing to leave. When I heard that, it was a huge relief. It's crazy to think that the guy wasn't even staying at the hotel. He was just hanging around and causing problems. I still don't know why he was after me specifically though. The rest of my trip went great, but the experience still creeps me out whenever I remember it. I used to be a night shift security guard for a mall that was right in the heart of several neighboring towns. I was working the night shift alone when the motion sensor for one of the stores was triggered. This happened every now and again, but didn't necessarily mean that someone was in the building. Sometimes the air conditioning units were left on in the store, and it would blow some clothing hung up on a rail, triggering the sensor, or a poorly stacked display would fall over randomly. The first time I responded to a sensor trigger, my heart was beating out of my chest, and I was thinking anything and everything of what could have potentially triggered the sensor. It could be an intruder, a wild animal, or even a ghost. I'd walk around looking over my shoulder at every turn. Your mind will play tricks on you when you're alone in a secluded place at night. By the 10th time this happened, it just felt like another day at the office. The alarm would trigger, and I would follow protocol, which was to go and check in and around the store, and then document my findings. On this one night, a sensor had triggered in one of the larger stores within the mall. This store had everything from toys to appliances to clothing. I attached my body cam, which we were made to wear if we left the office, and set off on my patrol. I arrived at the store, and nothing seemed unusual or out of place. The lights were energy-saving lights, so didn't emit as much light as during the day, making it harder to see. I walked around the dimly lit store, checking for any signs of unusual activity. I checked behind the counters, walked all the aisles, and even checked the changing room stalls. All the curtains were pulled back on the stalls, so I could see straight into them without the need to physically go and check. To be honest, if there was someone in the store, there would be many places to hide that we didn't check. But as long as we followed protocol and walked around, there was no comeback. I didn't find anything, and I made my way back to the office. I then had to upload my body cam footage to our systems and record them in the file. I watched the body cam footage as it was uploaded to make sure I had checked everything correctly. As I was watching the footage, I saw something I'd missed on my initial patrol. There appeared to be a pair of feet standing in one of the clothes rails I walked past. It could have just been a pair of shoes left out or thrown there by a customer who decided not to buy them but were too lazy to put them back. It happens more often than you'd think, so it hardly seemed worthy of calling for backup or the police. I walked back to the store, a little more on edge than I was the first time. We are not licensed to carry, and therefore had limited equipment to protect ourselves. Just mace and a nightstick, which I had never needed to use. Our duty was to observe and report. I arrived at where I had seen the feet standing in the clothes rail, and there was no one there. I went to stand at the area where the body cam caught the image, to see if there was maybe something that made it look as if someone was standing there, but there was nothing there. Again, I looked behind the counters, walked the aisles, but when I got to the changing room stalls, something was different. I noticed one of the curtains on the changing room stalls was closed. I specifically remember them all being open earlier, as I didn't have to go in to check them. I took out my mace and slowly started to walk towards the stalls. If anyone's in there, come out now. I'm armed and will shoot if necessary. There was no movement and no one came out. I slowly approached and pulled back the curtains to find no one there. It was a sigh of relief, but I was now convinced someone else was in the store. I decided to make my way back to the office and call for assistance. As I was walking to the exit at the back of the store, I heard a noise behind me. It sounded like something being knocked or moved. I looked back, scanning from left to right and back again, when I noticed a mannequin standing on the edge of the sporting goods section. I didn't notice this earlier, but I wasn't 100% it wasn't there. I approached with caution and stood staring at the face, which is wearing a hockey mask. I couldn't really see what was underneath it due to the lighting, but then the head lifted up and eyes opened. I fell backwards, and before I could lift my arm to spray him with mace, the guy started to run towards the emergency exit. I started to run after him, but he was much faster than I was. He burst out of the doors into the parking lot, and I left him there. Observe and report. I'm not paid enough to chase someone out into the open. I had done my duty, so I ensured the doors were locked and made my way back to the office. It was reported to the police, but we were unable to find any footage of the man, other than him being in that store after hours. And with no clear image of his face, there's nothing they could really do. This happened to me when I was 12, so almost 10 years ago. I went to our local mall with my mom, dad, and little sister. We were there to buy clothes for our upcoming vacation. I hated it. I was always made to try on clothes that I didn't like, because my mom thought I looked cool. I was easy to shop for. Jeans and plain black t-shirts were my go-to, but I was never allowed to stay home. I think my mom cared more about us having a family day out together than actually shopping. Now that I'm older, I can appreciate why she would force us all out together, but at the time, I really didn't want to be there. I would complain and moan about anything and everything. Me and my sister would play this game to kill time and stop the boredom. If you made your forefinger and thumb into a circle and held it below your waist, you'd get to punch the other person if you can trick them into looking at it. At first, it's pretty easy to trick someone, as they're not really expecting it. But the more you trick each other, the more creative you have to be, and the harder the punches get when you're caught out. We had been playing this game for most of the day when I hit my sister a little harder than I probably should have. She started crying, which resulted in my mom shouting at me and telling me to grow up. I shouted something back about how it was always me that got into trouble, and I walked off to sit on the benches outside the store. After waiting there for about 10 minutes, I started to need the toilet. I wasn't really supposed to walk off on my own, especially going to the bathrooms. Mom would say, "You never know who's lurking." Up until the age of 10, she used to take me into the women's toilets until she was told by a member of staff that I was too old to be in there. I looked around and decided to just run in and run back out again. I'd probably be back before they even knew I was gone. There was a long hall that led around to the men's toilets. As I walked in, a man was walking out with a dark green jacket on. He looked me right in the eyes as he walked past. As a kid, he looked kind of scary. He had scruffy hair and a beard. He didn't smell overly pleasant either. Sometimes you'd see homeless people coming into the mall to use the toilet facilities. They were occasionally escorted out if seen by the mall security guards, because they would wash their socks and underwear in the sink. These toilets were pretty close to an entrance that led out to the parking lot, so they could get in and out without being seen, for the most part at least. I didn't know if this guy was homeless, but he certainly looked and smelled like he was. I looked behind me as I went into the toilet, and the man was walking out. He didn't even look back. I went into one of the stalls, lifted the toilet seat, and started to relieve myself. When halfway through, I saw a flash. I didn't see where it came from, but I looked around. I couldn't see anything, so I continued to look when I saw a hand come over the top of the stall holding a camera. Someone was trying to take my picture. I didn't really see much other than the cuff of their jacket. It was the same color as the guy who looked at me as he walked out the toilets just a few moments before. I didn't even get a chance to finish pulling my jeans up and running out of there. I ran to find my mom and dad, who were at the bench looking for me, talking to one of the security there. I had splashed myself, and it was showing up pretty obviously on my blue jeans. My mom asked me what had happened, and when I told her, my dad ran straight into the toilets. The security guard tried to grab him, that no way would my dad let this guy try to get away. The security guard shouted for assistance on his radio and ran in after my dad. Both the security guard and my dad came out a few minutes later. They had checked the toilets and they were empty. He must have managed to escape there before I did. The police were called in and I had to give a statement and a description of the man I saw. I wasn't even confident it was him. They were able to pull some footage off the CCTV they had in the mall to add to a watch list. A few months later, my mom got a call. One of the security guards that was there that day saw the man, and upon recognizing him, he followed him into the toilet. He was caught in the act taking a photo over the stall to some other unsuspecting kid. He was arrested, and the police checked his home to find a number of photographs of young boys, including myself. We were summoned to attend court at the trial, but I was never called into the witness stand. The man pleaded guilty to all charges. I think he's out of prison now, but as a registered sex offender. On reflection, and now I'm a bit older, I don't think he meant to use the flash, but ultimately, it was the flash that gave him away. My mom was right to be worried. You just never know who's lurking. I had gone away with my friend Helen for a long weekend to spend some time together. We stayed in a hotel that was about 20 minutes away from the fourth largest mall in the US at the time. Me and my friend loved to shop, and this was one of the reasons why we decided to visit Costa Mesa in California. The first day of our trip, we went out for a late breakfast, and then headed straight to the mall to spend the whole day there shopping. We arrived at about 12 p.m. and walked around visiting the various retail shops within the mall. We visited one of the restaurants for dinner, and then continued on with our shopping. Around 6 p.m., I noticed a man in one of the shops we were in, looking over towards us. He was a good-looking man, well-dressed, well-groomed, and certainly in good physical shape. Coincidentally, I had seen him in the last two shops we'd visited, but not in such a blatant manner. I mean, he was standing there and was practically staring right at me and my friend Helen. I thought maybe he took a liking to one of us, but didn't have the confidence to come up and use his best pickup line. We were both married, but it's still nice to have a flirt and get some attention every now and again. We continued shopping, and it appeared as though we lost him somewhere along the way. After finishing our day of shopping, we made our way back to the car about 7:30 p.m. I remember this being the time, as there was a giant clock in the last store we visited, and Helen was saying she couldn't believe how late it was, and that she wanted to go for a drink in the hotel bar. The mall closed at 8, so it wasn't long until all the stores would be closing its doors for the night. As we were walking towards the parking lot, I saw the same man from earlier, standing outside a small convenience store on his cell phone. He looked right at me, but didn't smile or give any kind of gesture, which seemed strange considering he blatantly followed us earlier in the day. We walked through the doors, which led straight into the parking lot. As we did, we could hear footsteps behind us. Both me and Helen picked up the pace to get back to the car. We looked back, but couldn't see anyone. We put all our bags on the back seat, got in the car, unlocked the doors, and drove out of there as quickly as we could. As we were heading towards the parking lot exit, I noticed the same man on the phone watching us drive out of the lot. Me and Helen were talking about how weird it was. He was obviously following us, but didn't attempt to talk to us. And surely if he was going to attack us, he would have done it as we walked towards the car. As we were waiting at a red light, only 5 minutes away from the hotel, a car pulled up behind us, and two men got out. They ran up to the back of the car and smashed the back windows on either side. They told us if we attempted to drive away, they would follow us and kill us. I was frozen, and Helen shouted to them to take whatever they wanted. They took all our bags out of the back seat, ran back to their car, and reversed back before turning around and speeding off. We didn't have a chance to get the license plate or even the make and model of the car as the headlights blinded us as it drove away in reverse. We reported everything to the police. They said it's likely the man who was watching us gave our details to someone waiting just outside the mall as we left, knowing we had bought expensive items, but it's likely that they could not link him to it. They later found a car which was found abandoned. It had been reported as stolen, but my driving license was found in the footwell of the car. so they related it to the robbing. I don't know if they ever caught the men. When I was 16, I lived with my parents in a normal home in the suburbs. My parents were the type to take a lot of trips, both for work and leisure, and would do so all throughout the year. So when they would go during the school year, I'd stay home and watch the house for anywhere from a couple days to a whole week. I didn't mind, and sometimes even enjoyed it. During this week, my parents were both away for 6 days, so pretty much every night I'd go out and get food from somewhere. It was on the second night alone, and I played video games on the computer for nearly 4 hours straight. It was a Friday, so I was staying up late and didn't have to do any homework. But around 8:15, I realized I hadn't even eaten anything yet. I took a break and got in my car, driving to a sandwich shop nearby. It was close to closing time, so I wasn't expecting a line or anything. But when I walked in, there was a single man standing at the counter. He looked like he'd just ordered and was waiting for his food. I stepped around him and an employee took my order. Then I stood behind the man and waited as well. While I was there, though, I noticed how rugged the man looked. He was tall and skinny, wearing beat-up clothes and having long, thinning hair. He got his order and left, but I couldn't help but watch him leave, intrigued by his unusual appearance. A couple minutes later, I got my food and went out to my car, getting in and leaving the parking lot. It wasn't very busy out, so I got home pretty quick. I went to my room and sat at my desk and turned on a video to watch while I ate. It was 9 p.m. by then, but I wasn't that tired and was planning on staying up for another few hours at least. As I sat there, though, I heard a quick and subtle sound from downstairs. I paused the video and listened, but didn't hear anything more. I stood up and leaned my head into the hallway, listening again, but still not hearing anything. At this point, I still didn't know what the sound was. I wasn't paying attention enough, and it was so quick that I couldn't even really tell where in the house it came from. Although thinking it was probably nothing, I still wanted to be sure, so I walked downstairs and looked around. There wasn't much to see. Everything was just how it had been left. But as I walked past the front door, I realized what the sound was. I grabbed the door handle and shook it, recreating the exact sound I heard. Someone had tested the door. I quickly looked out the peephole, not seeing anything. Then I ran around to the back door. I scanned the backyard until my eyes fell on a figure. They were facing away from the house, standing at the door to the shed. He was tall and thin, and after a few seconds, I was almost positive that it was the man I'd seen earlier that night at the sandwich shop. Only a moment later, though, he forced the shed doors open and stepped in. I took this as my chance to call the police, so I ran up to my room and dialed 911 as I watched the shed from my room window. The operator said officers were en route, but less than a minute later, the man rushed out of the shed, holding several large tools. He hurried toward the house, heading straight for the back door. I ran out into the hallway to see if I could do anything to stop him, or maybe even run out of the house. But I was stopped by the piercing thud of metal slamming against the back door. My adrenaline spiked, and in those few moments, I made the decision to run for it. I sprinted down the stairs and straight for the front door, seeing the man continuing to break down the back door. I ran out into my front yard and onto the street, running to the corner of the block. A few minutes passed before 2 police cars pulled into the driveway and went in through the open front door. I made my way back to the house, getting there just as they pulled the man out and locked him in their car. They found him holding a heavy pipe wrench that he'd gotten from my parents' shed. Inside the house, though, It looked like the man went on a rampage, destroying everything he could in the few minutes it took for the cops to show up. Why he followed me home and did what he did is unknown, but the man clearly didn't seem very stable mentally. If I had chosen to stay inside though, there's no doubt that the man would have broken into my room before the cops would have made it. And I don't think anyone can know for sure what he would have done to me. Four years ago, I lived in a very small one-bedroom house with one of my best friends. We couldn't afford anything bigger, so that's why we settled with a one-bedroom. I slept on the futon in the living room, and my friend slept in the actual bedroom. This happened in fall, when it was just starting to get cold. My friend had taken a few days to go visit his sister a few hours away, so I was the only one at the house. This was over the weekend too, so I got to spend both entire days enjoying having the space to myself. It's not that I didn't like having him around, but it was just nice to not be crammed together in a tiny house for once. Anyway, on Sunday night, I went out to pick up some groceries and got home around 7. I had work the next day, but given the unusual circumstances, I decided to stay up a little later and watch a movie. I stayed there on the couch for at least an hour, almost finishing the movie, when there was a quiet thump from down the hallway. I looked over, not seeing anything, and figuring it was just the house, so I kept on with the movie. For the next 30 minutes, there were no other sound, so the thump was completely insignificant and had fully left my mind. Once the movie was over, I filled up my water bottle and went back to the futon, pulling it out into a bed and laying down. I was on my phone for a while, but I fell asleep sometime around 11. When I woke up, my eyes felt really heavy and my vision was blurry. I wasn't sure why I'd woken up, but I knew it was still late into the night. I rubbed my eyes a bit and looked over at the clock, but a very faint sound came from the other side of the house. Wood creaking, like someone carefully walking across the floorboards. My eyes widened and I snapped fully awake. My heart rate started rising as I got off the futon and walked over to the hallway. The creaking had stopped, but looking down the hallway, I got this terrifying feeling. I walked down until I reached the door to my friend's bedroom. Then I leaned against it and listened. It was quiet, not even a sound coming from the house. I slowly twisted the door handle and pushed it open a few inches, moving my eyes across the room as I continued to open the door wider. It looked empty, but I quickly noticed how messy the room was. There were things scattered around all over the floor and bed. Confused, I took a step into the room and flicked on the light. Instantly, from the corner of my eye, I saw a figure move away from the gap between the closet door. I jumped out of the room and slammed the door shut, then ran to get my phone as I heard the closet door opening and footsteps going into the hallway. Once I had my phone, I ran to the back door, seeing a large man coming down the hallway toward me. I got out and went through the backyard, but the man didn't follow. A minute later, I got to where I felt safe and called the police. They searched the house, but ultimately found nothing useful in figuring out who the man was or why he was there. They also aren't entirely sure how he got into the house, but it's likely he broke in while I was away getting groceries that night. My friend was just as terrified as I was once I told him everything, and we eventually moved out of the house, hopefully to never encounter that man again. I had bought my first house in my early 20s and lived alone. I was content and at peace living alone and decided to buy a house out in the country as opposed to the urban setting my apartment was located in. I had a few neighbors, but most kept to themselves, as I did as well. The house was a ranch-style home, which meant that there was no second floor, only a basement and first floor. The master bedroom was on the back side of the house, looking straight into the small backyard, and then nothing but woods beyond that. Since the basement was underground, the outside entry door had what is referred to as a bilko door, which is composed of two steel doors that swing out to each side, then a set of steps taking you down to a standard-size entry door into the basement of the house. I normally do not keep those bilko exterior doors locked, especially in the summertime, in case I need to get into the basement from the backyard. During the winter, though, I don't need to get in or out of the basement, so I lock those doors, and sometimes even in the fall as well. The first 2 years were quiet, peaceful, and enjoyable. I could walk out my back door and go hunting in the woods behind my house. I would get up in the mornings on days off and just open my garage door from sunrise to sunset, with no issues at all with anyone coming around uninvited. I worked a rotating 12-hour day/night shift schedule, which was brutal to get used to. I often had trouble switching from night shift to day shift, either sleeping too much or not enough. But the work schedule repeated itself in a pattern, so it was nice to at least plan days off in advance. One particular night in December, I had just finished my 3 work days of night shift. It was hard trying to fall asleep at night on that first night off, but it was essential to get my body back to sleeping at night again, to change back to the day shift work schedule, which I needed for the following 3 days. This first transition night, I would typically sleep very lightly. It had been snowing outside since dark, which was around 5 p.m., and a few inches were already on the ground by the time I went to bed around 11 p.m., and I fell asleep within the hour. I woke up around 3 a.m., and the house was dead silent. I laid there in the complete darkness, hoping I would drift right back to sleep soon. But after just 2 to 3 minutes, I heard a violent banging right outside my bedroom window. I recognized the sound as someone trying to open the locked basement bilko doors. I jumped out of bed and ran down the long hallway to the opposite end of the house, where the rear sliding glass door was and the outside floodlight switches. I switched on the lights and looked out the sliding glass door toward the basement bilko doors. There was nobody there. I looked closer and could see fresh footprint tracks in the snow, coming from the small path in the woods leading right up to the basement doors. There was no snow on the handle to pull the doors open, indicating that someone recently tried to open them. I saw a second set of footprints leading away from the basement doors, with what is sometimes called a rooster tail, indicating someone ran as fast as they could away from the house. I stayed awake until almost dawn, leaving the floodlights turned on to the back side of the house. I decided to follow the tracks into the woods at daybreak, but the newly fallen snow and blowing wind had covered them up completely after I made it a few feet into the woods. I concluded whoever it was trying to break in probably heard my 240-pound body charging down the hallway inside the house, and they ran off into the woods before I was able to get to the sliding glass door and turn on the lights. I decided to not call the police, since nothing was damaged or stolen. From that day on, I made sure to keep all the doors locked and no longer left the garage open all day, unless I was working there. 8 years later, I sold the house without any further incidents occurring since that one particular event. This happened during a road trip I was taking on the way back from seeing my family for the holidays. I'm not usually one to drive more than a couple hours because I much prefer flying, but this year the tickets to where I was going were way more expensive for some reason. It would have cost me over $1,000 for a round-trip flight that only went a few states over. I had planned everything out so that I'd get home a few days before I had to go to work. But a snowstorm blew in on the day I was going to leave, so I had to stay an extra 2 days before finally starting the drive. The roads were empty since it was past the holiday rush, and most of the drive is pretty out of the way from the big cities. The hardest part of it was always staying awake and fighting the boredom. The first 8 or so hours went by without any trouble though. Sure, I was tired, but the snow on the road kept me awake and attentive. It was about 10 p.m. and I had a hotel booked in a small town just 2 hours further ahead. But as I drove, a small light came up in my mirror. It was the headlights of someone behind me, which was actually the first person I'd seen on the road with me in over an hour. Their lights were getting bigger quickly though, showing that they were coming up really fast. And soon, I could see that it was actually a large van of some kind. It was only a one-lane road, so I couldn't get out of their way, but I figured they would still swerve around me, given they were going so fast. Once they reached the back of my car though, they matched my speed and stayed behind me. After a few seconds, I realized they weren't trying to get around me, and we drove like that for almost 10 minutes. It was kind of unnerving, being that it was only us on the road, and yet this huge van was trailing right behind me. It wasn't a normal following distance either. They were so close that I couldn't even see their front bumper or license plate in my mirror. Maybe I was quick to feel uneasy about it, but an exit came up for a gas station, and I chose to turn off, hoping they would stay on the road and that I could put some distance between us. But as I veered off and down the exit ramp, they stayed right behind me. I pulled into the gas station and parked at one of the pumps as the van pulled into the pump behind me. At this point, I just didn't know what was happening. Part of me thought that this was something bad, but another part of me thought I was just overreacting. I knew that this was the only gas station in the past 30-ish minutes, so it wasn't all that unlikely that they would also need gas. Before getting out to fill up my tank, I shut my car off and looked around. The store part of the gas station had its lights off and a closed sign hanging from the door. I looked to the sides of it, seeing nothing but empty darkness. No houses, no buildings, just a field covered in snow with a single road going through it. I looked in my mirror. A man was now standing outside of the van and putting gas in, so I got out and began doing the same. As the numbers slowly ticked on the gas meter, the man quickly put his pump back and sealed his gas cap. I looked over, seeing him walking to the back of his van. Then I heard the loud ratcheting sound of the back door being lifted open. There was something in that moment, maybe a gut feeling, or just an instinct of some kind, that told me to get out of there. I pulled the pump out of my car, and not even a second later, 3 men were sprinting at me from around the back of the van. I dropped the pump on the ground and quickly got in my car, locking the doors just as one of them grabbed the handle and tried to rip it open. I was shaking and moving as quick as I could to get the car on. All 3 of them went around trying each door, but then immediately sprinted back to their van before I'd even had the chance to pull away. When I did though, I saw them drive away soon after, going in the opposite direction, down the way we had come from. I let the police know what happened, but never even got a call back with any updates. I think it's obvious they were trying to abduct people under the cover of night on the vast, unpopulated highway. What's terrifying is how confident and, for lack of a better word, professional the whole operation was. It seemed that as soon as they realized I was securely in my car and it wasn't going to be effortless, they fled the scene without even needing to communicate with each other. It was like they had done it many times before. What would have happened if they'd gotten me? I don't know. But I urge everyone to learn from my mistakes, because you may not be as lucky as I was. In 2019, I did deliveries for a pizza place near my school. I'd work most days after class, so I could afford to pay for my car and rent. It wasn't a great job in any aspect, but it was good enough to get me through college without being completely broke. This night was no different than most in the beginning. I clocked in at 6 and delivered for 3 hours straight, then took a lunch break and started again at 9:30. I picked up the next order and started heading to the place. The address didn't look like a house, but the route it took me on to get there was not what I was expecting. It took me further out from town, away from most houses and stores, and into a business center. It was an area full of small office buildings and nothing else. I drove down the road and couldn't really tell what any of the addresses were, so I just followed the directions on the GPS and hoped it would take me into the right parking lot. When I turned in, I drove through a pretty long parking area until I reached the front of the building and could read the address. It matched up with the one on the order, but something was off. The parking lot was completely empty, not even the streetlights were on, and the office building had no signs of anyone being inside. I double-checked the address, thinking there must have been a mistake, but it all checked out. I even tried searching it on Google for any places nearby with the same address, but no, this was it. I set my car in park and got out, glancing around before walking up to the door. It was a glass door with a dark tint covering it. I knocked, then took a step back and waited. It only took a moment before the door opened. It was a middle-aged man wearing very casual clothes and holding a small grin on his face. He suddenly got overly excited and said he was happy the food had finally arrived and that everyone was hungry. I looked behind him, not seeing anyone else, and only a single light on in the middle of the hallway. But I ignored it and just told him his total. He must have realized what I was looking for though, as he quickly explained that everyone else was in the rec room on the 3rd floor for a company party. I smiled to be polite, but the man was talking with an overwhelming amount of excitement. So much so that it almost felt like he had to be faking it. He pulled out his wallet and handed me cash for the pizzas, along with a $10 tip. But as I took the money, he asked me for a favor. He wanted help bringing the pizzas up to the 3rd floor. The man had put me in a strange position. Having taken the generous tip already, it felt like it would only be right to help him. On the other hand though, carrying a few pizzas isn't exactly difficult, and it didn't seem necessary by any means. He started walking without me having answered yet, urging me to follow him as he made his way to a door leading to some stairs. I trailed behind, keeping my distance but following him into the stairwell. As I entered though, I felt a cold rush of air and noticed all the lights were off. Only the small light from the hallway lit the entrance to the stairs. The man started making his way up, but stopped once he realized I hadn't continued following him. He turned and made a humorous remark about the lights, but his grin was quick to leave once he saw that I wasn't going to follow him anymore. There was no hesitation as he came rushing down toward me with anger in his eyes. I tossed the pizzas on the ground, rushing out of the door and into the hallway, then running for the exit and bolting to my car. I saw the man come partly out of the front doors before going back in and slamming them shut. I immediately called the police after driving to a different parking lot. The man had run off by the time they got there, and since he paid in cash, there was no way to know who he really was. The office building was empty though, and there was nobody else on the 3rd floor, so it's clear that it was just some sort of trap. What he had ready for me on the 3rd floor is unknown, and I hope that nobody ever has to know. I work for my dad at his small construction business. He runs a yard and warehouse full of materials, as well as manages the job sites the workers are at. Since I was only 17 at the time, my job was to basically be the errand boy. I'd drive materials back and forth and pick up anything that was needed. Depending on the job though, some materials would need to be there before workers arrived, because they would need them so they could get to work right away in the morning. So every once in a while, during busy weeks, I'd have to start work really early, like 2 or 3 a.m., to make sure I could drop everything off in time. Obviously, this was only during the summer, when I didn't have school, so I really had no excuse for not being able to work. I liked doing the deliveries early though, because it was calm, and I didn't have to deal with anyone telling me what to do. On this day, I arrived at the warehouse at 3 a.m. and loaded up, then started making my way to the job site. It was a repair job on an old, maybe even abandoned, building at the edge of our town. When I got there, I saw a truck parked right outside. Its lights were off and it didn't look like anyone was nearby. It was way too early for anyone to be working, so I wasn't expecting to see any cars here. I parked and got out, walking up to it and seeing that it wasn't a company vehicle either. The windows were tinted and I couldn't see inside. I turned and looked at the building, trying to see if anyone was here. I called out, asking if anyone was inside, but got no response. Feeling a little weird about it, I pulled out my phone and called my dad. It rang for a minute, then went to voicemail. Figuring it was probably just a worker's personal truck that they'd left there, I went back to my truck and started unloading the materials. It took probably an hour, then I got back in and started to drive off. As I left the area though, I looked in my rearview mirror, and suddenly, the truck's lights turned on. I practically slammed on my brakes, stopping on the side of the road and watching as the truck started to back out. Someone was in there the whole time. Knowing that, I was sure that it couldn't have been a worker because they definitely would have responded to me. I sat and watched as they made their way out of the parking area and onto the road. I grabbed my phone and quickly dialed my dad's phone number again. While I waited for him to pick up, I looked over, seeing the truck had stopped right next to me. I stared at their window, knowing someone behind it was probably staring at me. I tossed my phone on the seat and started to drive forward, but the truck was quick to match my speed and prevent me from getting back onto the road. But there was nowhere else for me to go. To my left were trees, and to my right was this truck blocking my way. I started to panic, putting the car in reverse and trying to back up. The truck did the same until they tapped to the side of my car, making me lose control and slide completely off the shoulder and hit the side of a tree. The truck quickly stopped right at the top of the road, as if they were going to get out. But then their brake lights suddenly turned off again as they put it back in drive and sped away. Just 20 seconds later, another car pulled up to the side of the road, and a man got out and ran up to me, asking if I was okay. I didn't know his name at the time, but it was one of the workers that was just arriving at the job site. He only saw the last bit of what happened, but said he recognized the other truck as Samuel's, who was another worker my dad had hired a few months ago. As it turned out, a bunch of tools and materials were missing from the job site, adding up to almost $10,000, and that's only from that one night. He could have been slowly stealing a few things at a time over the past few months. I think what happened that night, though, was that Samuel thought that by me seeing his truck, it would eventually all get traced back to him and he'd get caught, so he tried to stop me. I don't know what he would have done to me, but considering I was the only witness, it's likely that he wouldn't have gotten caught as long as I was never seen again. Unfortunately though, his name and everything else didn't add up to anything, and it was likely he was either an illegal immigrant or some kind of felon that went through the effort of getting fake or stolen IDs and work documents. I was never expecting something like that to ever happen, but at least it's really unlikely that I'll ever see that man again. I work part-time at a gas station in my city. It's more on the edge of the city, near the suburbs, and overall is just a very typical gas station. It's not super creepy or isolated or anything like that. I only really chose to work here though because rent prices were going up. My other job wasn't cutting it. The only shift I could do to work around my other schedule was overnight, and gas stations are one of the few places offering those shifts. Anyway, this was just 10 months ago. It was pretty cold out this night, and there was some snow on the ground still from a heavy downfall a few days ago. But other than that, the night was going pretty typical. Being in the suburbs, there's not a whole lot of traffic going around the gas station. It's mostly just a couple cars passing by every once in a while. By 12, only a handful of cars were coming into the gas station every hour. After a bit, I got bored enough to leave the front desk and walk around the shop, rearranging the items on the shelves to look nice. And it was just a couple minutes later that I heard the door open. I turned around and saw a man walking in, right up to the front desk. He leaned over the counter and looked both ways as if he were looking for someone to help him. "Can I help you with something?" I said as I made my way back to the counter. The man turned and looked at me, almost as if I'd scared him. But then he hesitated before saying, "No, I'm good," and walking out of the store. It was fairly obvious he did need help with something, but seeing that made me quickly think of the possible robbery he was plotting. I did work at a gas station after all, so it was kind of always in the back of my mind. I watched the guy go outside and into a car that was parked in a very strange spot, kind of near the pumps, but not actually in the parking section. He got in and drove away. I had no way to tell if he was actually planning something, but all of the signs pointed to it. I figured maybe being behind him when he walked in, and not off the counter, threw him off, and somehow that was enough to deter him. Whatever happened, I was confident after a few minutes of thinking that this was definitely an attempted robbery, and I called the police to report it, just in case they were going to try a different gas station. They said an officer would come by in just a couple minutes to get a report, so I hung up and waited. But not even a minute later, that same car pulled back into the parking lot. They went right to the spot that they had parked before, then just waited there with the car on. But I was almost positive that I could see movement in both of the front seats, like there were at least 2 people in there. I quickly locked the front doors and prepared myself for what could soon happen. As I continued looking out the window though, the car just stayed there, nobody getting out, like they were watching or waiting for the perfect moment. Luckily though, cops pulled in and immediately recognized the car as I described it. They pulled in behind it, locking them in. Surprisingly, there wasn't much of a scene. The officer pretty much just walked up and then pulled 2 men out, one of which was the guy that had come in earlier. I guess they were trying to play it off like they weren't doing anything, but that didn't really work out for them. While it seemed to be straightforward what they had planned, their car showed a different, more disturbing possibility. In the trunk, there was a stash of weapons, along with rope, tape, and an assortment of similar items. Both men are behind bars, but I still feel almost traumatized after knowing what they had in the car. If I hadn't reported them after the first strange interaction, I would have been through far worse than just being robbed, and possibly would have never been seen after that night. I work for a company that sells bulk products out of a small warehouse. Sometimes the products we get in are pretty expensive, so I was hired as a security guard during the late hours of the day and most of the night. Being a small warehouse, there's not too much need to walk around the place all night. I spend most of my time in the office, looking at a bunch of live camera feeds. During my first 3 years working there, I'd never had a single incident. No people ever came by at strange hours, no attempted break-ins, nothing. It made for a boring job and left me mostly unaware every night, even though it was basically my job to be aware. On this night, I pulled into the small parking lot and parked by the front door next to the car of the only other worker that was still there. When I got inside, I let him know I was there, and he left shortly after. I checked all the doors and made sure the systems were working properly. Then I sat back at the office and stared at the screens. My attention span died out after half an hour, and I pulled my phone out. I still made sure to check the cameras every 30 seconds or so, but every glance back at the screens showed no differences. Then at just a couple minutes before 1 a.m., the system made a beep sound. I'd only ever heard it during the initial tests I do at the beginning of my shifts, so this was the first time I'd actually had something come up. After a quick look at the alert, it was a motion detection of a person walking by the building. It took a few tries to find the right camera, but on the back side of the building, a man was walking right on the edge of where the parking lot meets the grass. He had a thick hoodie on and was too far to see exactly what he looked like. The direction he was walking in wasn't really toward anywhere though. I mean, that's why I'd never gotten alerts before, because our building is too far out of the way for anyone to ever have a reason to walk or drive by it. I watched this man go down to the end of the parking lot, switching cameras to keep track of him. But then he suddenly stopped for just a moment and looked toward the building. He turned his head back and forth, looking across the whole side, then started to walk onto the pavement and toward the side of the building. Immediately, it went from just odd to possibly something I'd have to report on. The man walked along the side, looking at every door he came across, but not trying anything. He would just kind of look around and then move on. Once he got to the corner, he went around to the front and then went right up to the main door. I watched from the cameras as he knocked on the door and heard it echo from inside the building. I got up from my chair and opened the office door slowly, looking down the hallway and seeing the man standing behind the entrance doors. I don't think he could see me through the glare on the glass, so I stood in the doorway and just watched him for a moment. He was trying to look through and knocked on the door again. I went back into the office and pressed on the speaker button that allowed me to talk to them outside. This is a private location. You need to leave. I watched on the cameras as the man looked up at the speaker. He looked like he was going to say something, but then he frowned and turned, knocking on the door again. In this moment, something just struck me with an intense, eerie feeling. It was some sort of gut reaction to this man's behavior. I looked closer, noticing he was keeping one hand in his pocket the whole time, making me think this could be far more dangerous than I'd initially thought. I contacted the police through our security line, getting instant connection with them and starting to explain the situation. I walked back into the hallway and looked down while I talked to the dispatcher. But the man suddenly pulled something out of his pocket and slammed it against the door. I couldn't see what it was, but from the way it hit the door and the sound it made, I knew it was some kind of metal object that he was trying to break the glass with. I rushed back into the office, hearing a few more hits as I locked the heavy door behind me. Then I quickly looked back at the cameras. But by then, the man had given up and was running away from the building. In only a few seconds, he was completely out of sight of any of the cameras. It was as I waited for the police to arrive that I replayed the footage of when the man hit the door, seeing pretty clearly that he was holding a small gun and slamming the handle against the glass. We got a full report on it, but so far, even with some decent footage of the man, he hasn't been identified. We also don't know what he was intending to do once he got in, though he made it obvious after hearing my voice that he did not care I was inside. But from the partial crack formed on the door, he was likely just a few hits away from shattering it, and then I would have been forced to find out the man's true intentions. I'm a former Target employee and worked in the clothing department mainly. I worked there for 7 months total, and I liked working there. It was a good job, and most of the co-workers as well as customers were nice. But there was one co-worker that I had some problems with. It was a guy named Ed, and he worked in the electronics department. Over time, I got to know him a little bit. Not that well, though. There's a lot of turnover at a store like Target, but also many employees that stick around. So the people in all departments that worked there for most of the time that I did, I either recognized or got to know. I only spoke to Ed briefly once or twice for the first several months. I was much closer with many other co-workers. But one time, I was taking my break and was by myself in the break room. I think it was a little bit later at night, and that's why nobody else was in there. Well, just a couple of minutes after I got in there, Ed entered and then started talking to me. He was friendly for the most part and asked me some things about myself, and I was friendly back to him. But then, like 5 minutes into the conversation, he asked if I wanted to hang out with him and suggested that he could come over to my house. Now, I really didn't want to hang out with him, and I especially didn't want him coming over. I said I didn't think that I could, and then I changed the subject because it was kind of awkward. We talked for the rest of my break. Well, it was mostly Ed talking, and I was just listening. Finally, I was back to work. I didn't really see Ed for the rest of my shift that night. But over the next week or two, Ed started to talk to me more and more. He would go out of his way to see me, and he asked me again if he could come over to my house. He was starting to be a bit of a creep, to be honest with you. After that, though, I kind of stopped seeing it. I didn't really think about it until I heard that he had been fired. I didn't get any details on why he had been fired or exactly when. I also didn't really give it that much thought, other than realizing that he wouldn't be talking to me anymore. So for the next week or so, work went on as usual. But one day, I was not at work, but back home in my apartment. I got a text message from Ed. At first, I didn't know who it was, because I didn't recognize the number. I did not have Ed's number, but I was part of a large Target group chat with a bunch of us coworkers. Anybody in it could see my number, and I guess Ed was still a part of it. He texted me saying that it was him, and told me that he was going to come over to my house. I was thinking, what's up with this guy and going to my house? I texted him back saying, please don't come to my house, Ed. It was nice to work with you at Target, but I don't think we should hang out. I expected him to understand, but apparently he didn't. Now, he didn't respond to what I said, so I wasn't sure if he was mad or not, or if he even read it. But a few hours went by, and that night I was still at home. I lived by myself in my apartment, which was on the first floor of my building. It was probably like 9 o'clock at night when Ed texted me back finally. He said that he was at my house. When I read those words, I instantly started sweating and my heart began racing. How did he know where I lived? Was he really at my house? I started to text back, but didn't know what to say. I went over to my door and looked out the peephole into the hallway. Nobody was there. Maybe he was at my apartment, but not in the building yet. I looked out of my back window as well and didn't see anything. I hoped that he wasn't actually there, but it was a really strange thing to say if he wasn't. Finally, I texted back, telling Ed that I wasn't at home. I thought that maybe that would make him leave if he was here, or deter him from coming over if he wasn't. But he responded by saying, yes, you are home. I saw you. When I read that text, I started looking around like a paranoid person. My mind was racing. I was thinking crazy thoughts, like maybe he was already inside of my apartment, hiding under my bed or something. But he wasn't. I looked in all of my rooms. I then texted him back, asking him where he was. He responded by saying, at my house. I was confused by this, and I looked out the peephole and windows again without seeing him. I started to think that maybe he was just joking. At least, that's what I was trying to convince myself. I went back over to my peephole again and looked out of it. I was looking out of it for like a minute straight, but still, nobody was there. I turned around, and then I saw him. He was standing on my patio right outside of my sliding door and looking in. I screamed like crazy and then ran from my bedroom. I boxed myself inside of it and then called the police. A few moments later, I heard a knocking on my sliding door. I got another text from Ed telling me to let him in and asking me why I screamed. I ignored it and told the 911 dispatcher what the situation was. They told me that an officer would be there shortly. Ed then tried calling me, but I didn't answer and ignored it. He texted me several more times, and I put my phone down because I didn't even want to look at it. It was then that I started to hear a loud banging coming from my sliding door. He really wanted me to let him in. This went on for the next several minutes. It honestly felt like forever. At last, the police arrived. I heard Ed talking with them loudly, and I left the bathroom. I soon saw him talking with officers, and they eventually got him to leave. Then, I spoke with the officers, and I told my side of the story. Ed ended up getting trespassed from my apartment's property, and he was told not to come back. Luckily, I haven't seen him since then. I haven't heard from him either. Obviously, I blocked his number and stuff. Hopefully, I never hear from him again. One of the scariest moments of my life happened when I went to Target last year. I went there one night to do some normal grocery shopping. There's a Target not that far at all from where I live, and I go there almost weekly. So I got there sometime at night, and I don't recall exactly when. I went inside, got a cart, and then started getting my items. I was inside of the store probably for about 20 minutes shopping at least. Then I finally checked out and left the store. Headed back to my car, which I'd parked not even that far away. But when I arrived at my vehicle, which is a pretty normal sedan, something happened. I was behind it and about to go around it with the groceries in the back seat. That's when I saw somebody looking at me through the back window from inside my car. It was a man, and I didn't see him well at all because he ducked down less than a second after I saw him. I freaked out and left the cart there and went running back inside of the Target. After making it back inside, I dialed 911 to call the police. I told them that somebody was inside my car at the Target. Then I waited inside the store for the police to arrive. It took probably less than 5 minutes for them to get there. But in the meantime, when I was waiting, I was standing just a little ways inside of the Target near the first aisle. As I was waiting for the police, I was sure that I saw the guy that was in my car enter the store. He immediately walked to the right and didn't appear to notice me. I wasn't 100% sure, because like I said, I only saw him for probably less than a second inside my car window. But I was probably about 80% sure. I went down one of the aisles in case he was looking for me or something. A short time later, the police arrived. I went out of the store with them and we checked my vehicle. Whoever was inside of it was now gone, but my doors were all unlocked. I must have somehow forgot to lock them when I went inside of Target. I didn't have anything inside my car worth stealing though. I usually kept it pretty empty and clean. Still, what was a random man doing inside of my car? I had never seen him before. I gave his description to the police, and I also let them know that I thought I saw him inside Target. I made it clear that I wasn't 100% sure, but I was pretty certain that it was him, and it made me think that it was more likely to be him after knowing he wasn't in my car anymore. The man had dark hair, was sort of short, and wearing a tan t-shirt and jeans. He also appeared to be pretty young, in probably his 20s or maybe early 30s. The police told me that they would go into Target and see if he was still there. I stayed by my car talking to another officer for maybe 5 or 10 more minutes. Another officer said they did not locate the man inside Target and figured that he must have left. They said they would take one more look around the store and I could go home if I wanted to. At that point, I finally left to drive home. Now, the Target that I go to is near a lot of other stores, but the way that I exit is I drive down the road to the side of Target. Then I go down this quiet road that leads to more stores about a quarter mile down the road. When I was driving down that road, I saw this guy randomly walking alongside of it. It was weird because there was no sidewalk there and it wasn't very well lit, so you wouldn't really expect people to walk along it. Just seconds later is when I realized that it was the same guy. As I was approaching him, he turned and saw me. That's when he bolted out onto the street suddenly. It was like he was running towards me, and I veered to the right to avoid him. It wasn't going very fast, but luckily he didn't get to me, and I was able to successfully get around him. Then I sped away from him as he stood in the road. No other cars were nearby, and I got out my phone and called the police to report the guy. After that, I was finally able to make it back home okay. Looking back, I still can't believe that it happened. I avoided that Target for weeks after the events. Finally, I was able to go back, and I still shop there sometimes. Nothing like that has happened, and I haven't seen the guy either. I'm hoping that whoever he was, the police found him, or he stopped his wild behavior. I used to work at Target a couple of years ago. I worked inside the store on the sales floor and mostly on the grocery side. During this time, I was a part-time employee and I worked maybe 20 to 30 hours a week. One night, I was working a pretty standard shift for me. It was from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. When it started, things were kind of busy. I would move all around one side of the store and do whatever I needed to, mainly stock shelves or organize things. I also answered customer questions and told them where certain items were if they wanted to know. I'd been working there for about 6 months at the time, and I knew the store like the back of my hand. So fast forward to about 9:30 p.m. or so that night. By then, the store had become very quiet. We were open until 11 p.m. back then, so we were not about to close, but it was still very quiet. Many of my coworkers had left, and the overnight team was beginning to arrive. On the grocery side, though, it was easy to stay busy. That side always had more shoppers, so it required more attention. All of the employees at Target carry a walkie-talkie for communication. I heard somebody say my name on the walkie, and I responded to them. I wasn't sure who it was, but they told me to go to the next channel, so I did. I was used to people calling me on there, and had received several calls earlier in the night. When you got a call on the walkie, usually it was anything from taking a break to being needed in another section of the store. As I was flipping to the next channel, I was wondering who it was that was calling me. After changing channels, I announced that I was there. At first, I heard nothing at all. Then, after a few seconds, I heard this creepy-sounding laugh. It went on, and I spoke again, asking who it was that was talking to me. They didn't answer though, and just kept laughing. Once more, I asked who it was, but was starting to suspect that it was a joke. Then they stopped laughing and said my name. It was a man speaking in a very deep voice, like he was trying to disguise it. He said that he was waiting for me in the parking lot. I laughed a little, assuming that it was somebody just messing around. After all, most of us were just about done for the night. I still couldn't figure out who it was though. I kept working, and pretty soon was done and could clock out. I went into the employee-only area, got my things, and then left the store. Now, the parking lot was very quiet. Most of the cars belonged to employees and were parked towards the middle. Then there was my car parked near the way back corner. It had been very busy when I arrived. So when I was walking out to my car and about halfway there, I noticed one other car parked near mine. It was a few rows over and to the left, at least 100 feet away, but the engine was running. When I reached my vehicle, it was just a few feet from it. I noticed the car starting to drive. I really wasn't thinking anything of it until it began heading in my direction. And not only that, but it started going really fast. I didn't recognize the car as belonging to anybody that I knew. It quickly drove closer, and I got inside of my car and locked the door. Then the car parked in the space next to mine, but going in the opposite direction. I looked over, but the window was really tinted and I couldn't really see in. It was at that moment that I remembered what the person had said to me on the walkie. Was that not a joke? I sort of had a bad feeling about this. Still, I figured that I would just drive home, and I hoped that whoever this was would not follow me. As soon as I started to pull away though, the car started driving and turned around. I then realized that's exactly what was going on. I turned and started heading back towards Target. I didn't want to drive home being followed. I drove back towards the front middle of the parking lot and closer to the store. This was where most of the other cars were parked and scattered around. I parked in between two other cars that were parked already. The car that was following me drove closer, but then parked across and a little ways back. Now it was maybe 50 feet away from me. Then I got out of my car and walked extremely fast for the entrance of Target. I looked back briefly and saw that the car was still running, but nobody got out. That made me feel a little bit better. After I made it inside Target, I saw one of my coworkers who I knew walking by, and I told him about what happened. We both decided to look and see if the car was still there. After making it to the entrance doors, we looked out and I pointed to the car. We watched it, and then something surprising happened. It pulled out of the parking space that it had backed into. Then it slowly drove up the aisle and out of sight. The car had finally left. I then left Target once more and headed for my vehicle. I walked quickly and made it inside. Then I started the engine and backed out. But after I backed out, I was going to drive down the normal way that I usually left. But it was then that I saw a car in the far distance coming from the corner of the parking lot opposite to me. It was headed in my direction, and I was pretty sure that it was the same car. I scrambled to turn my car to face the other direction. The car was still really far away from me, but it was getting closer. Then I quickly drove out of the lesser-used back exit of Target. This road led to another quieter road that went behind another store that was nearby. I think that it was a sporting goods store, and after I went on the road, I went into the parking lot. From there, I drove all the way around the sporting goods store and parked on the side of it. I knew that the car following me would have no way of knowing that I was there. It probably assumed that I just tried to get back on the highway. I waited there, just hoping that I would not see headlights coming around the corner. Several minutes went by, and thankfully, I didn't. Then I was finally able to leave and go home. After that experience, nothing like that happened while working at Target. I don't know who it was that was talking to me that night on the walkie. It was very possible to get on our frequency, even if you were in the parking lot. I just don't know who would do it or why. This happened not that long ago. I went to the grocery store one night that was kind of near my house. It was only like 10 minutes away. I was inside the grocery store for maybe 30 minutes. Inside, things were not very busy, and it was maybe 9 p.m. When I left the grocery store, I went back to my car, which was parked at about the middle of the parking lot. There were cars scattered all around, but not too many. I noticed that there was a car parked right next to mine, though, that wasn't there before. I only really noticed it because there were lots of open spaces around it. The car parked next to mine was a silver-colored sedan. I didn't pay it much attention and started loading my groceries into the back of my car. But when I was just about done, I glanced over at the car that was parked next to me and noticed somebody sitting in the driver's seat. It appeared to be a man, and he was wearing a clown mask. This mask in particular was really creepy looking. It wasn't one of those cheap ones, but a really detailed one. I didn't know why he was wearing it, because it wasn't anywhere near Halloween. It just seemed kind of random and odd. He wasn't looking at me though. I put my cart back and then went to my driver's door and got inside. It was then that I looked over and noticed that the clown guy was looking right at me from inside his car. He didn't wave or move or anything, but was just staring in my direction. I smiled at him, figuring that it was some kind of a joke. Then I started my engine and drove away. As soon as my car started, he started his car as well. When I began driving, he did the same. I watched his car follow mine to the end of the parking lot, and I was worried. Immediately, it seemed like this clown guy was trying to follow me. I left the parking lot and went onto a quiet road, and then that one took me to a busier one. The clown drove behind me the whole way. The roads were pretty quiet with it being later at night. There was not a good chance that he could get stuck in traffic trying to follow me or something. If it was rush hour, that might have been a possibility. Instead, he easily stayed on my tail as I drove down the highway. After maybe 5 minutes there, I was getting worried of what I would do. I couldn't let this guy follow me all the way back home. So when I was driving, I called my boyfriend to tell him the situation. He was really confused when I told him a clown was following me on the highway. He thought I was joking at first and started laughing. I told him that I was serious and this was not a joke. Still, he didn't seem to take it as serious as I was. I told him that I was going to drive to his house. My boyfriend's house is about 5 minutes away from mine. He said that was fine with him and told me not to worry about it. I did feel a little bit better knowing he wasn't too concerned, but still, this clown guy was really creeping me out. It's one thing to dress as a clown later at night, but it's another to follow somebody home. Several minutes later, I exited the highway, followed by the clown. Then I took a quiet road for about a mile before the turnoff for my boyfriend's street. When I turned, the clown behind me did as well. The street was very quiet at this time of night. My boyfriend's house was about halfway down the street and on the right side. When I reached it, I began pulling into the driveway. It seemed as though the clown was going to do the same thing. That's when I saw the door to the house open and my boyfriend running out. He was wearing a clown mask of his own, one that he wore at a Halloween party a couple of years ago. He was holding a yellow wiffle ball bat as well and waving it around like a crazy person. The clown in the car behind me started pulling into the driveway and then stopped. My boyfriend was screaming like a madman and went running straight for the clown's car behind me. Then the clown backed out and drove away before my boyfriend could reach him. I got out of the car and asked my boyfriend if he was out of his mind. I couldn't believe what he was doing. He took his mask off and started laughing, calling the other clown a wimp for running away. We went inside after that, and I ended up being really glad that he did that. It could have been extremely dangerous though. Who knows who that guy in the clown mask was and what he wanted. Maybe that was just his way of disguising himself, and me being a young woman, he was trying to stalk me. I'm really not sure, but I'm glad that my boyfriend considered the whole thing one big joke. He told me that he thought of the idea when I told him I was going to his place. He remembered the clown mask and thought he would out-clown the clown. I'm really glad that it worked. So, this story took place just a few weeks ago. It's really bizarre and also scary. I play in a fantasy football league with a bunch of my friends. If anybody doesn't know, in fantasy football, you draft players that are in the NFL. And based on their performances for the week, your team gets points. Your team plays another team every week. There's playoffs and a championship game at the end. Well, in the league that I play with my friends, whoever gets last place in the league has to get punished. Before the season starts, people think of ideas for punishments and we vote on it and decide it. So everybody knew that this year, our punishment was to dress up as a clown. Then the loser would have to walk down one of the busiest streets in our nearby city. Thankfully, I didn't lose, but one of my best friends, Ben, did. My friend Jordan and I decided to go with him for his punishment. We were going to record it and send it to everybody else in the league. We first went to a party supply store and bought a cheap clown mask and costume. Then we wrote on a piece of cardboard, "I suck at fantasy football." We then drove to the city, which was about 15 minutes away. It's a pretty large city and also very busy. When we got there, the sun was setting, but there was still a lot of people out. Ben reluctantly put on his loser clown outfit, and we were laughing like crazy. We parked in this little parking lot on the edge of downtown, and then walked several blocks. When we got into the heart of the city, Ben had to walk the entire way down the street and back. He kept trying to negotiate and make it a shorter walk, but it was our responsibility to make sure that the punishment was fulfilled. Ben walked on the sidewalk and people were staring at him. We laughed and got our pictures and videos. Then we started to head back. When we did though, we noticed that there was another person dressed as a clown. It was really strange to see. I mean, there were a lot of people around, but I didn't expect to see someone else who looked like a clown. Obviously, we had to have Ben go over and say hi to the other clown. We walked over, and when we got over to him, saw that his mask and costume was a lot better than Ben's. He didn't really seem amused though. The other clown just kind of stood there. Ben attempted a handshake with the other clown, but he left him hanging. He wasn't saying anything either, so we just laughed. We started walking back to our car, which would take probably less than 5 minutes or so. We walked along the sidewalk, away from where most of the people were. It was a much quieter area where we parked. About a minute into the walk, Jordan said that the clown appeared to be following us. I looked back and saw him walking behind us, but a long ways away. We all found this funny, and figured that the guy was just joking around. We kept walking, but surprisingly, the clown remained behind us. Eventually, we crossed the street, and had to go just another block to get to the car. When we crossed the street, it was much quieter, and hardly anybody else was around. The clown then crossed the street as well. He appeared to be getting closer. I found it a little bit strange that he was still behind us. Soon we made it to the parking lot, and at that point, saw the clown had started to run after us. We all hurried to get inside of the car. We were laughing, but I honestly found it a little bit creepy. I have a smaller SUV, and I was driving, with Jordan in the passenger seat and Ben in the back. I started the car and then watched and laughed as the clown kept running after us. When the clown reached the parking lot, he stopped. I started driving out, and we would have to go right past him. He was now standing by the exit. When I was starting to drive by the clown, he turned and faced us. Then I saw him pulling something out of his pocket. I didn't know what it was because I looked away to focus on the road. But the next thing I knew, I heard a loud noise come from the back of the car and a crashing of glass. Then I heard Ben say that the clown threw a brick at us. I drove out of there and the back window was half smashed. Everybody in the car was fine, and Ben didn't get any glass on him or anything. We called the police though and reported the clown, and were glad to get away from him. I thought he was harmless. It was creepy that he followed us, but we had no idea that he would pull a brick out and throw it at us. The whole situation is so crazy, I wouldn't believe it if I wasn't there myself. It made for the most memorable fantasy football punishment ever. I had a terrifying experience with a clown back when I was in high school. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. It all started one night when I was at work. Back then, I lived with my parents and worked a job at a nearby convenience store. I walked to and from work, and I would ride the bus to school every day. Between work and school, I was pretty busy. So I started work from 3 p.m. until 9 p.m. on this night. Work went by as usual, and when I got off, I left to walk home. The walk would take me about 15 minutes on most days, and I didn't mind it. At my job, I would just be sitting at a counter most of the time, so walking afterwards felt nice. Also, the neighborhood was generally really quiet. I never felt unsafe or had anything scary happen. It did seem a little bit creepy at night sometimes because of how quiet it would be. After leaving work, I started walking along the sidewalk. There were sidewalks for my entire walk home, but I did have to turn a couple of times. About 2 or 3 minutes into the walk, I noticed somebody kind of up ahead. They were standing on the grass between the sidewalk and the street, kind of randomly. It was dark out and they were far away, but when I approached, I soon realized that it was a clown. Or at least it was somebody dressed up in a clown costume. It was really creepy looking, and I knew that I would have to walk past it. I didn't really want to, but I did. I tried not to look when I got close, and the clown didn't say anything to me. When I passed it by, I could sense him looking at me though. Still, I didn't look. I just walked past and kept going towards my house. At first, he appeared to stay where he was. When I got like 20 feet away, I heard him move, and it sounded like he went onto the sidewalk. I got about 50 feet ahead of him, but then I heard him walking behind me. I hoped that he wasn't following me, but I had a bad feeling that he was. When I turned, I looked over and saw that the clown was walking a distance behind me. He turned exactly when I did. There was no question that he was following me. I kept going and tried to walk a little bit faster. I didn't look back, but listened closely in case the clown was going faster as well. He didn't seem to be getting any closer to me though. I crossed another street, which he also did. Now I only had a short distance to go before arriving home. When I got to my street, the clown walked after me. That's when I looked over my shoulder for the first time. He was there, maybe 40 feet back now, and was looking at me. I'd walked faster, and by now my heart was racing. I was really freaked out. I'd wanted to start running, but was afraid that the clown would do the same if I did. Instead, I remained as calm as I could and kept walking. Soon I made it to my driveway. I felt a lot better, but still had to make it inside the house. I walked up and got to the front step. It was at that point that the clown reached my driveway. Then I heard him starting to walk up the driveway after me. This made me really nervous, and I scrambled to use my house key to unlock the door. I was panicking, and that was causing me to go slower than usual. I heard the footsteps quickly approaching as I fumbled around with the key. At last, I had unlocked the door. I went inside extremely quick and then slammed the door and locked it behind me. I heard my mom say from the other room, "What was that?" She then called out my name. I heard the doorknob turn behind me. I ran over to the living room and found my parents. I told them about the clown guy following me home. We went over to the door to look, but he was now gone. I told them the story. My parents said that they would drive me to and from work for my next shift. We figured that the clown had left. We were all very creeped out by this situation. Later that night, I went to bed, and the clown didn't come back or anything. But the next morning, I got up to catch the bus for school. It was really early and still dark out because school started at 7:25. So at about 6:50, the bus would usually arrive at my house. And after getting ready for school, I headed out. I left my house at about 6:45 and started walking to the end of my driveway where I would stand and wait for the bus. When I was beginning to walk down the driveway, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked and saw the same clown coming around the corner from the side of the garage. I couldn't believe my eyes. I turned and ran back inside the house and called the police right there. Then I found my parents and told them what was going on. We all stayed inside the house until the cops got there. They found the clown hiding in the backyard. I couldn't believe it. I was sure that he had left the previous night. After that, I was able to get a ride with my parents to school because I missed the bus. But I was just grateful to be okay. It still blows my mind that the clown was there in our yard all night. We should have called the police the previous night after he had followed me home. We had just assumed that he left. I guess he camped out on the side of the garage, which was actually a really good hiding place. That guy was a total creep. This remains the scariest moment of my life. Now scared of clowns because this happened when I was a freshman in high school. During this time, I lived at home with my parents and older sister. We lived in what I would describe as a pretty average neighborhood. Our backyard was sort of big, but overall it was a very populated area. So one night, I was at home playing video games in my bedroom. My sister was in her room and my parents were out in the living room. I always liked to play video games in my room, and I had a really good setup in there. I had my gaming chair, big monitor, and a TV as well. I remember that after gaming for a long time, I got to a loading screen. I leaned back in my chair to stretch and I casually looked to my right out of my bedroom window. The window looked out to the backyard, and at the back of the yard was a small woods. Something caught my eye when I looked out there. It looked sort of like there was a clown looking at me from just inside the woods. At first, I thought surely that wasn't the case. I kept looking and was squinting my eyes to see better. It sure looked like there was a clown there. So I got up from my chair and walked over to the window. Now that I had a better view, I could see that there was in fact a clown there, or at least somebody that was wearing a clown mask. They were standing just a couple of feet into the woods, partially blocked by trees. But the clown was looking right at our house, possibly at my window. It was extremely creepy to see this. I ran out of my bedroom and found my parents in the living room. I told them there was some guy dressed as a clown in the backyard. They followed me to my bedroom window, but when we got there, whoever this guy was now gone. I told my parents where he was and everything. We all went outside after that and looked around the backyard, although I was really creeped out. Luckily, we didn't see or hear anything when we were out there. The woods in our backyard was not that big. It only went back probably 20 feet, and then there was a fence. I was guessing whoever this guy was went through the neighbor's yard. At least he wasn't in our yard anymore. It was a real mystery as to who he was and what exactly he was doing back there. We all went back inside, and I went back to what I was doing. I looked out of my window every so often, but luckily the clown man did not return. The next couple of days were normal. No signs of the clown or anything. But it was less than a week later, and I found myself home alone. My parents were gone at friends, and my sister was at a friend's house also. I was playing video games in my bedroom, and it was probably about 9 o'clock at night. It was the same setup as the previous time. I randomly looked out of my window, which was to my right, about 15 feet away. I saw the clown guy again. This time, he was not in the woods though, but standing in the middle of the backyard, much closer. He was facing me and looking directly at my window. I got up and ran over to the window and covered it with my shades. I then ran out of my bedroom as quickly as possible. I didn't know what to do. Why would the clown guy come back? I called my parents and told them about it. They advised me to call the police if he didn't leave the yard immediately. So I looked out of another window, but I didn't see the guy anymore. I was hoping that meant that he left. I got off the phone with my parents and then looked out of several other windows. I didn't see the clown. Then I headed back to my bedroom. When I was walking in though, I heard a knock at the front door. I went over and checked out the front window and saw the clown. He was standing on the front step. I just moved away from there and ignored it. I went back into my bedroom, put my headphones on, and forced myself to just play video games. I did that until my parents got back home. When they did, the clown guy was long gone. After that night, I kept my bedroom window covered at all times. I also didn't stay home by myself for several weeks because I was too creeped out to. I'm not sure if the clown guy ever came back or not, but I didn't see him or hear from him again.